Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're looking at part 16 of examining TurretinFan's response concerning Revelation 16:5 by Nick Sayers. And so we are still on TurretinFan's part 14 video. So this is where TurretinFan basically is going on a defense of James White. And so having gone through this material, many years ago and following through and watching James White sort of squirm about what we've been saying over the years, TurretinFan sort of come on the scene, is a bit fresh and doesn't really know all the details, and I guess in a way just wants to defend his friend. That's really what I can see. And so he has shown a video which all parties agree James White was pointing out the wrong issue. But then later on, when he was schooled by James Snap, he did another video where he was pointing out the correct issue. So this is way back in 2014. And this should have vindicated Jeff Riddle, but James White doesn't really like TR people, King James people. He thinks they're cultic, and so he believes we're just like Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. We don't have an apologetic in the real world. That's his own words. He believes that we can't win atheists or the Bart Ehrmans of the world or Muslims or anything like that, that we are deficient in our bibliology. We're deficient in our theology, and most of the time he likens us to heretics and people who are of questionable character. And so that's just what I find most of these guys do. They just sort of throw you under the bus. We've seen Mark Ward do this. We're all Ruckmanites now, and even Bryan Ross. Bryan Ross was putting his hand of friendship out to these guys, and after not a long period of time, after like about a year, they bit his hand, nearly gnawed it off. And it was quite amazing that all Bryan did was expound on a certain word. And I would watch his 5 videos that he did on that recently. But anyway, so we're back dealing with James White. James White is way more toxic than someone like Mark Ward. He is overtly toxic towards TR people, King James people. But unfortunately, this is part and parcel of I've written a book, and I exposed some of James White's shenanigans and things that he said, and just sort of pointed out where he was completely wrong, where he basically didn't know anything about Revelation 16:5. And so, unfortunately, TurretinFan, in being a friend of James White, is in defense mode of him. And so this video is just sort of it's sort of like a nothing, but we have to go through it anyway. So I might try and speed it up a little bit, because it's just going through pretty much nothing, and just listening to TurretinFan say, poor James White, and hey, Nick Sayers is being nasty, and that's about, the crux of it. So, but I do want to go through these because I want to catch up, because TurretinFan's done part 16 now. I think it was just yesterday. So let's just get straight into this. And if you've got any comments, any questions, we can do with that. But let's just jump straight into this.
Potential variant issues that are cropping up throughout here. Lots of little sigla of various kinds, indicating various points at which there's textual variance. So, but anyway, we continue on.
Translations that are going to be made from it. And by the way, in the future, all the modern major translations will come up with new editions that will adjust to the Nestle-Aland 28th edition. My point here is that those who support the modern critical text are sort of caught in a conundrum. They want to criticize the TR for readings that have less solid support, but then they're willing to accept a modern critical text that has readings that have in some places at least, no support.
Now, that's the one place where Riddle overstated his point. And that's the point where Riddle...
So what we see is because James White was completely caught with his pants down and looked ridiculous, I find TurretinFan is just going through trying to nitpick what Jeff Riddle has said. He's trying to nitpick what I've said. So James White, in his book, he can say things like, there's absolutely no evidence for Revelation 16:5. And so if I say, well, there's absolutely no evidence for 2 Peter 3:10, TurretinFan's like, no, there is evidence, just not in the Greek. And it's like, well, obviously that's what I mean. And so when we're reading James White, we understand that that's what he would mean too. But I've taken him to task on a lot of those things, going over those things. But it just seems like TurretinFan, he's just looking like trying to nitpick. And that's what I find with TurretinFan. Listening through, 16 videos now, like even the Beatus of Libana thing that he did the other day. Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it's like, Herman Hoskia, a text critic, is just stating the facts. Here it is. He has the reading that follows Theodore Beza. And it's like, but no, TurretinFan just doesn't want to even give that. It's like, really? I mean, pretty much everyone admits that. It's like, yeah, it's got the future reading there. But, I guess in a way I was expecting TurretinFan to be a little bit more like, yes, I can see that, I can see this. But he's just basically everything that I would think that a normal viewing of my book would, a normal response would provoke, in a sense where if you read my book, you would be provoked to have a certain response and go, yes, I can see that has the past, the present, and the future. It's talking about the one which was and is and shall be. Yes, that's the same reading as what Theodore Beza had there. Yes, this is, and you would expect someone just to acknowledge those things, but it's just fighting tooth and nail against these readings. And it's sort of, I guess in a way, you can just see that there is a presupposition there and a bias, which I guess I'm kind of disappointed because I'm totally now expecting TurretinFan just to turn around and say, oh, well, Theodore Beza said that he had an ancient manuscript, but he was just like Joe Biden, and I'm expecting that now, where I guess, someone without a presupposition or someone not linked to James White probably would have a different opinion of this. And so anyway, we'll just keep going through this. And so, yeah, all the way through this, it's like, oh, Jeff Riddle, he said this wrong, and Nick says he said that wrong, but never once is it, oh, James White said this wrong. James White, the guy who says he's like the conjectural emendation guru, doesn't even know about his own text. It's just ridiculous, really. Like when I actually just gave up on James White. It just got so ridiculous in the end. And even when I watch his debates, I just cringe and go, oh my gosh, how can this guy say these things? And the usual, getting the saying a joke here and there and getting people laughing and things like that. But when it comes down to facts and stats and figures, and James White's just lost it. He's just lost this whole battle. And someone like Jeff Riddle just runs rings around James White, and in their debates, just people make shorts of it and constantly bring up these debates because he basically said that every verse in the whole entire New Testament is up for grabs and could change with new evidence that comes along. And it's like, so we don't have a stable Bible, So anyway, let's continue.
May have misled Dr. White. If Dr. White was listening carefully, notice up to this point, Riddle said it correctly. In each case, he said Greek support, Greek support, Greek support. Now Riddle said no support. And if he's talking about the Ook reading here, no support isn't true. There's no Greek support, and both Dr. White and I reject this Ook here. But that does not
notice Dr. White and I reject this, so he's really putting himself in the place of like, I'm protecting James White. It's sort of I mean, this is a battle that happened like, years and years and years ago. I mean, this is a 2014 video. I mean, there's been so much said about this that it's like, even just in videos that I've done, I was doing videos on Facebook back then and did a whole bunch of things on Revelation 16:5 and James White and all the tweets that he was doing and all the rest of it. And this is like a tired old argument that's been put to bed. And TurretinFan's sort of, I guess inadvertently, he's trying, he's reading through my book, and I'm glad of that and all the rest of it. But he's standing in front of James White like, no, he didn't mean this and he didn't mean that, and he really believes this and he really believes that. And it's just sort of like, sorry, dude, you weren't there. you just didn't know what was, because we were all listening to the dividing line, frequently. Like, we wouldn't miss one. We would go through it. We would post it on the Textus Receptus sites, on Texting Canon group, which isn't available now on Facebook. That was run by Robert Truelove. There was another one, I think it was Textus Receptus Bibles by Keith Mason. And so we're all talking about this sort of stuff on Facebook. It was just like, hey, can you believe what James White said here? And people would link to, the exact time and exact words that he'd said. And it sort of just got us to the point where we realized that James White really isn't that literate in bibliology. That's sort of where we came to. We were all just sort of going, yeah, James White, he's a contester for this and that. And then it just sort of got to the point where it's like, actually, we've sort of debunked everything that he's trying to say. And then it was like, let's move on, and then a whole bunch of other guys, Mark Ward and Elijah Hixson and others just sort of joined, Peter Gurry, and they joined Facebook and were coming against us. But the whole thing with James White just fizzed out because of these type of issues. And so, it's sort of like really, me just jumping in and trying to defend George Bush and the weapons of mass destruction thing. And it's just sort of like, man, it's like for someone who doesn't really know all the details, and it's like, give it up. You're fighting a losing battle here anyway. So let's just go through this video, which isn't the proper video where everyone admits James White was saying the wrong information. But of course, I'm saying things wrong. Jeff Riddle saying things wrong. James Snap saying things wrong, but never James White. He's the guru.
I mean, no support. And thankfully, I think I'll be able to show that in just a minute. So we'll let Dr. White respond first to see, does he dig his heels in and just say, I defend the conjectures? Or what will he say? Inquiring minds want to know.
Yes, and I guided you through to the next video. And it's like, anyway.
Let's listen to a little bit more about James.
Now, I am especially sensitive to allegations of inconsistency, and that's what we just got. I'm being inconsistent. Am I? If what Pastor Riddle just said was true, I am. But of course, what Pastor Riddle said isn't true.
So notice what Pastor Riddle said isn't true. There is no conjecture. So he doesn't, like, this was the thing. It was like either he doesn't know or he's rejecting it and all this sort of stuff. Well, clearly here he is exemplifying that he doesn't know, has zero understanding. And so that's what I'm saying about Revelation 65. No understanding. Was just making stuff up. Saying, oh, they sounded the same. Esomenos and Ozios just sound the same. And so he had no idea. And so doesn't this show you, this is the scholar that you guys are going to for conjectural emendations? Isn't it embarrassing that he has no idea about these pure conjectures, no Greek support in his text that he's been holding up, since it came out, saying, yeah, Nestle Alarm text, and now Jeff Riddle's like, well, what about this? Jeff Riddle's wrong. See, this is the thing. why not turn around and say, yeah, kudos to Jeff Riddle. He got it right here. James White really needed to get up to speed. Well, why isn't this type of thing admitted? See, if TurretinFan wasn't a friend of James White, he would be saying that. If this was, Jim Bob Smith, a guy from Canada, he'd be saying, yeah, he got it wrong here. This is pretty silly. He needs to get up to speed with this. Yes, if he wants to position himself as the main go-to guru for conjectural imitations, he probably needs to get up to speed. And
so parts of what he said were true. The final statement, no support, was not true. But excuse me. I still think that Dr. White missed what Riddle was trying to say, and therefore he may have misunderstood. I think that Riddle was trying to say something else. I don't think Riddle meant to say the last time no support. I think that was just a misspeak by Riddle. I don't think he was lying. I don't think he was trying to deceive anyone. I think he just said no Greek support, at least 2 or 3 times before then. We paused each time. And now he said no support at the end. And coupling that with the description of it as a conjecture, what will Dr. White think? Well, the short answer is Dr. White will think that a pure conjecture, and we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, a pure conjecture is one where it's just a scholar's idea of reconstruction, like Beza's idea of reconstruction, versus something where there's not Greek support, but there is support from other versions. That support from other versions is not a pure conjecture. Maybe it would be considered a conjecture in New Testament scholarship. Maybe it would, but in any event, it's not a pure conjecture. It wouldn't be considered a conjecture in textual criticism in other books, because
so basically, TurretinFan's just learnt this from me, but he's critiquing, Jeff Riddle and James Knapp and myself according to the things that I've just taught him, that there are differences in conjectural imitations. And most people didn't know and understand this until I'd written this. I mean, people in the top tier of, textual criticism did. But James White was basically like, if there's no Greek support, then it's a conjectural imitation. That's exactly what he said. I've listened to every single conjectural imitation video that he's done since 1995. And read everything that's available on the internet that has James White conjecture, imitation, Beza, etc. Revelation 65. I've read everything on it, and so that's his position. So when we say, "Oh, there's no support," that's his language. And TurretinFan's all of a sudden like, "Oh, Jeff Riddle's not using the correct terminology, and Nick Sayers is not using it." It's like, we're using exactly the same terminology as James White. And so please be as critical toward him as you are toward us.
In many other cases, other books from that time period, you would need to go to the translations because of the paucity of evidence from the main text, from the original. But let's continue on.
And let's take a look at the screen. What was ironic here is that Pastor Riddle has it backwards.
And here again, the fact that he says Riddle has it backwards makes me think that Riddle's final comment there about no support and his description of it as a conjecture and his failure to identify which reading he was talking about, those 3 things have come together to mislead Dr. White. So that Dr. White thinks that Riddle's talking about one thing when Riddle was talking about a different thing. But again, let's let Dr. White continue.
And so, as I mentioned, he did another video later where he knew what was being talked about.
Well, a couple things. First of all, here we have the 2 Peter 3 reference. And 2 Peter chapter 3, now it probably would be a little bit easier if I had these 2 windows switched back and forth. I apologize for that. But here is the NA27 right here. Here's the NA28 above it, and the NA28 apparatus is down here. So this should be over here. But anyways, I've just told you what it is. Here is right here. Let me see how big I can get that there. There we go.
Now, I just pause here to say, you'll notice that there's 2 things on the screen that you can see near the crosshairs of the ScreenFlow cursor on there. You'll notice the one that he's currently paused over is the ook, and then the full word, which has support in the Sahidic. I think there might be some other support as well, but it's noted here that there's support for that in the Sahidic. And that reading is found in the Sahidic. But above that, you'll notice that there is labeled, excuse me, there's labeled here with a CJ standing for conjecture, this reading of Agra, or sorry, not Agra, Arga, this reading of Arga from Bradshaw. Bradshaw being the scholar who has proposed, I believe he's a scholar, who's proposed that the reading here should be Arga. It's not adopted as the text, but it is noted in the apparatus. This conjecture is noted in the Nestle Aland 27 apparatus. So this is, he's at the right verse, 2 Peter 3:10. This variant of Arga is a conjectural emendation. It's a reading that has no evidence, maybe some internal evidence or something like that, but it has no manuscript evidence of any kind in its support. It's just a pure conjecture by Bradshaw. And it seems to meet what Riddle was talking about. Riddle was saying that the Nestle Aland 28 includes these conjectures, and they're going to be used for translation. Whether they're used for translation or not, I don't know how that would fit into this, but certainly it looks like the Nestle Aland 28 or Nestle Aland 27 apparatus there has a conjecture, and then underneath it is this ook, etc., which is not support. I think this is what Riddle meant to be talking about here, was this ook, which is not found in any Greek text, and is supplied here from the Coptic Sahidic. And that's problematic. That's the one that Riddle had in mind. But remember, Riddle at the very end, after many times saying no Greek, no Greek, no Greek, finally in the end he said no evidence. Well, this one doesn't qualify as no evidence, but the one above does, because the one above is a conjecture.
So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, he's holding Jeff Riddle to a standard that James White doesn't keep, and definitely up until this point in his career has he laughs at evidence when you're like, oh, it's in the Latin, it's in this. He's like, that's not evidence. It has to be in the Greek, So,
conjectural emendation in the purest sense of that. You'll notice it's noted with a CJ. Whereas this is not supported by any Greek text, but it is supported by a version, an ancient version. So let's see, does James White address the ook, or does he just pass over it because he's focused on a conjecture? Does he's looking for a conjecture because Riddle called it a conjecture and said it had no evidence?
You're given that little thing right there, CJ, conjecture. Bradshaw conjectures the reading Arga. All right, that's what we call a conjectural emendation. Now, that's not in the text. It's in the apparatus. Translations are made from the text, almost never from the apparatus. I don't know of anyone who has made a translation based on a conjectural emendation in apparatus, at least not a major translation, not one done by a committee or anything like that. So let's first compare the level here. We have a central doctrinal affirmation in the Comma Johanneum. The Trinity itself, sort of. It's not how anyone in the early church defended the Trinity, but that's another issue. Vitally important. This, anybody could even tell you what it's about. The other one over in Acts is about how you express the first in Macedonia, and it's whether you have a sigma. Wow. Okay, in other words, these are utterly irrelevant issues.
So he doesn't, you notice that he says that the one in Acts is utterly irrelevant and isn't reflected in the translation because it's just about whether or not a sigma is used. Do you see him staunchly defending or advocating for the sigma or not having the sigma? I think the answer is neither. Does he advocate for the sigma or against the sigma? Just says it's utterly irrelevant. But what about 2 Peter 3:10?
There's another what Enokai is another. Enoch Enokai is another possible conjectural emendation. There's very, 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 very few of them. And nowhere does modern text make the text reading the conjectural emendation.
So notice that he says, in none of these cases does the text does the Nestle LN28 make the conjectural reading the main reading? He's thinking of conjectures like this Bradshaw conjecture. That's what one labeled here was CJ. So these are never made the main reading of the text. Well, maybe he's not right. Maybe there are times when it is. But if there are times when it is, he doesn't know about them. He's not arguing that there are times when they're part of the main text, and they should be. That's how you would advocate for something. If he said, well, Enoch versus Enochi, I think that's what he had mentioned as another example. He never says, well, the other, in that case, the conjectural limitation should be in the main text. And that should be our main text, and good on them for doing it. No. He says they're not in the main text. And that's something he's happy about because he rejects conjectural limitations. He doesn't say that in so many words here, at least not so far. But that's why he's content with being opposed to the Kama Yohanium while simultaneously not being concerned by conjectural limitations.
Certainly doesn't here. But the point is, the conjectural limitation was in the previous editions of the Nestle.
Oh, notice he says certainly not here. Let's just go back and hear that again. Because you notice he's thinking that this Bradshaw conjectural limitation is what Riddle's talking about. And this isn't in the main text. Notice this arga here, and this is not found here in the text. It's just omitted from the main text because it's not original. And even though Bradshaw likes the idea, the committee does not.
Nowhere does any of the modern text make the text reading the conjectural limitation. Certainly doesn't here. But the point is, the conjectural limitation was in the previous editions of the Nestle. He's got it backwards. Look at the NA28. Let me. If I blow this up, it's going to just sort of disappear for you. But I'll just scroll through the whole thing here, and you will notice. Go to verse 11, and that which is in the 27 is no longer in the 28.
Okay, so you'll notice when he says that, he was pointing to the arga, although the uk is still shown. But watch as he scrolls.
That's because Nestle 28 took out all the conjectural limitations, even from the apparatus.
Notice that point. Nestle Allen 28 removed all of these conjectural limitations, even from the apparatus. So, since Riddle said he was talking about a conjectural limitation, or he appeared to be talking about one, and specifically he said there's something with no evidence, which sounds like a conjectural limitation. So White thought he's talking about these. And White, so far, from advocating for these, seems happy to show that the Nestle 28 has removed them not only from the main text, but also from the apparatus.
So the exact opposite of what Pastor Riddle said is what actually takes place in the text. So I'm not being inconsistent by any stretch of the imagination. There is no meaningful parallel between any of the conjectural limitations. But may I now sort of wrap things up with, I've got one section here color-coded. Let's listen to it real quick.
So I'll break that off there. I don't want to just play his whole screen video. I do have a link to that video for people who are interested to listen more carefully in the description on the YouTube episode description. For this episode, you can find the link to Dr. White's previous ScreenFlow video, which is not on the usual Alpha and Omega Ministries page because it was just a quick thing that he put out. It's on his Dr. Oakley 1689 page. So where does that leave us? When let's come back to this view. So you notice that after this video, I think the timing is this, that after this video, James Snap comes back and says, the CJs are never put in the text, and then he says that's simply incorrect, and then says readings with no Greek manuscript support are adopted in these places. Now, that statement, this is simply incorrect, is an issue of what's that meaning of conjectural emendation. In other words, clearly the CJ was missing from the apparatus. However, there's a difference between a CJ in that apparatus and a reading with no Greek manuscript support. So Snap is saying that's simply incorrect, which is not quite accurate. But this part is apparently true because as far as I can see, there doesn't seem to be any Greek support for the Ook there at 2 Peter 3:10.
He'll just joined and said TurretinFan is defending James White no matter what. Yeah, and it's quite annoying. I mean, when we were going through our unicorn thing, it just sort of got to the stage where it's like, okay, well, here's evidence here, and it's almost like even before it's looked at, it's like he's worked out like 10 different ways to sort of just say that something's wrong, and instead of focusing on what it was, just look at what it isn't, and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, so here we're just seeing hyper defense of James White. I'm almost just inclined to just skip over this bit, but it's like I'm only just really going through just to see what else TurretinFan is saying. But I mean, if you want to know more about this, let me just show you. Like, you can just go to, say, confessional bibliology here. I might put these links in the chat. So if anyone really ever wants to, go down that rabbit trail, conjectural emendation. And this one on 2 Peter 3:10 by Jeff Riddle. I mean, just read through Jeff Riddle's material. It was a debate between him and James White. James Snap got involved and commented and things like that, but all this stuff it's freely available, and there's lots of information out there about it. And so conjectural emendation by James Snap Jr. And I'm sure if we went down the list here, we would see James White mention maybe in some of the older posts, like cracks in the text. Any reading that is in any of the tradition is either found in the text or in the footnote. And James Snap just goes, wrong. And he's just like that. He's pretty blunt. But Acts 16:12, talking about the issue there. They decided to adopt the conjecture made by earlier scholars. Shortcomings in the Nestle-Aland apparatus, which is quite interesting. Things that are wrong in the NA28. If we go earlier, James White. No, nothing much there. But these are all to do with, like, he's still talking about Acts 16:12. And talking about the conjecture there. And so this stuff is, like, say for James Snap, he's written so much on this. This, like, it just goes on and on forever. And Jeff Riddle, this is in 2018 he's doing this. So for 4 years he's been studying this thing and looking at this thing, and so when he writes on it, it's very clear, it's very precise, it's very well written. And so this is the year before James White's like, oh, I don't follow those readings, So anyway, let's continue through this part.
But that is not the same as saying that there's no evidence because there's Sahidic. And we say, he says, he adds this, he says that has nothing to do with what.
And so I'm going to tag James Snap Jr. and Jeff Riddle in these videos. And also, I listened to one today where he was saying the author of the KJV Today website is just simply wrong. Homo halberstatensis didn't, say this and say that, or get his reading from somewhere and write a commentary on something else and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, I mean, TurretinFan is coming to this whole issue, green and fresh. Okay. I usually don't jump into an issue and all of a sudden I'm the expert on it. Now, someone like the author, and he was sort of having a real dig at the author of the KJV Today website being anonymous. And it's like, well, what's that got to do with anything? And I'm just sort of, it's just this negativity of just like, there's just no, oh, well, he chooses to remain anonymous and he's written some very good things or whatever. It's just like, he's wrong here. And then just all the way through, that just becomes a standard. He's wrong, and it's like I'm sort of getting really tired of it. And so, but anyway, I'll wait until I get to that point. Let's just go
what Riddle
through
was
that
talking
as fast
about.
as we possibly can.
He says the reading in 2 Peter 3:10 that has no Greek manuscript support but has been adopted is not Bradshaw's conjecture. Riddle was referring instead to the variant unit at the very end of the verse. The compilers adopted ook shall not be found, adding ook without any Greek manuscript support. Yeah, but you'll notice that you would not find this. You wouldn't know that Riddle was talking
but
about
a guru in the textual critical field, like James White makes himself out to be, should know. Don't you think? You know what I mean? Like, who am I? I'm nobody. Who's Jeff Riddle? He's just a pastor. And even James White is sort of like, oh, just this backwoods sort of pastor in the middle of the bush there, hardly has any impact in the real world, just belittles the guy. And here's James White, like, I go and do conferences. I am the guru. I know about, all this stuff, and conjectural emendations is my forte. And it's like, hey, he has to get schooled by someone like Jeff Riddle. Like, Jeff Riddle was completely 100% correct. So, in other words, James White is not as academic as people think he is. He's not that correct. He's like, I've sort of given him the benefit of the doubt because TurretinFan's pretty much playing the wrong video. It's like, okay, whatever. But isn't this showing that James White knows zero about his own text? Zero about his text. Doesn't it show you that? He's like, out of all this, you would have to go put your hand up and say, yes, I admit James White knows nothing about conjectural emendations in the Nestle Alarm 28th edition. And then after reading my book, you'd have to put your hand up and say, yes, he knows nothing about conjectural emendation in the King James. See, that's the thing. He's calling our one a conjectural emendation when it's simply not. It's not a conjectural emendation at all. But and TurretinFan now knows that. But he's learning that because I've been teaching that in my book. Now he's turning around and sort of holding all these other guys to task with those same standards and being like, well, we do have manuscript evidence for that. It's just not in Greek. And it's like, okay. So in James White's book, he calls it conjectural emendation. He builds up to it. He's like, later on, we'll show you an irrefutable place in the Bible, in the King James, where there's a conjecture, there's conjectural emendation created in the mind of Theodore Beza. He just made it up. He's gone on TV shows saying that basically Theodore Beza just made it up. And so, and now you're worried about whether Jeff Riddle said it was Greek manuscript or Greek evidence or no evidence. It's like, and that's neither here nor there. Anyone who was listening to Jeff Riddle or James Snap or myself knows what we're talking about. Clearly Jeff Riddle was way ahead of the game here. It's people like James White who are behind the eight ball and trying to play catch up and talking about conjectures. I'm the guru of the conjectures, and someone like Jeff Riddle's like, just pointed out, hey, the king's got no clothes, and people are upset about it. And and TurretinFan is on the defense of James White, and you can tell that through reading my book, because there is a lot of things that James White has said about me and about other people and about Revelation 16:5 that I've just pointed out. And oftentimes in the book, he will skip over that and just sort of roll his eyes and go, oh, here we go again. He's saying bad things about James White. And it's like, well, just pretend it's Bob Smith or something, just. And the thing is, he's constantly dismissing that these things actually happened to us. Like we're just these, nasty people out there who just have it in for James White for some reason. you know, because he comes against the King James, so we come against him. It's like, no, we've many of us have contacted him personally and actually put out a hand of friendship and fellowship to the guy. And he's just like absolute toxic, vomits all over you. Publicly, like, this guy, oh, what a psycho, what a this, and you're just like, okay, that's James White, you know, and we have to publicly defend ourselves, and so that's what I did in my book. So I'm showing everyone what he's saying, and showing that it's wrong, showing, or every step of the way, James White knows almost zero about this issue. He's just making it up, making up stuff about Beza, making up stuff about the Ethiopic, making up stuff about pretty much every step of the way.
You didn't know that unless you knew it from somewhere else than the material that White played from Riddle. So in the portion, at least in the portion of Riddle that we heard, he doesn't specify. In fact, he's not 100% sure it's 2 Peter. He just says 2 Peter or maybe 1 Peter 3:10. He doesn't tell you which. And
like TurretinFan's just keeps going on and on about this, you know, he didn't give the specific details. And it's like, well, yeah, fine. Everyone is in agreement that he got it wrong in the first video, but it's the second video where he goes through the ook, you know. So,
he doesn't tell you that he usually, like 3 out of 4 times, I think it was, says no Greek support. And the final one, he just says no support. And that sounds like a traditional conjecture, like the CJ from the apparatus of the NSL 27. And those readings are just gone in the NSL 28, just as Dr. White said. So then he said, you know, he claims that there was not a humorous mistake and that the mistake was White. And if that is, I mean, it may be that we can establish that there was a miscommunication here. Riddle.
Maybe we can establish that there was a miscommunication here. No, James White just knows nothing about these topics until he's shown them by people who he labels as backwater Hicks. Dangerous people, you know, who could never win, you know, who don't have an apologetic in the real world. You know, he says like stuff like that about Jeff Riddle. And the thing is, like, out of all the people who are TR only and all that, Jeff Riddle is like, you know, a really nice guy. You know, like, he's one of those guys who you're like, yeah, I'm glad to have him on my team, because some people can be pretty abrupt and rude and they're not well polished and all the rest of it. Jeff Riddle's a really, really nice guy. And he's not the sort of guy who you just sort of, you know, someone would just smear and slander, but it's that James White just goes to town on him. It's sort of like everyone looking at this. I think James White, for the confessional bibliology side, James White was the main drive towards that exploding as it did and becoming so popular, because he kept pointing to Jeff Riddle as just this horrible, horrible guy. And the more people looked into it, it was like, actually, Jeff Riddle's a really nice guy, even though I don't agree with some of his reformed theology. So anyway, let's continue.
Made this comment, and he meant that to talk about the ook, and that James White misunderstood him because of the fact that he was talking about what seemed to be talking about a conjecture with no evidence, and not simply a reading with no Greek support. If he had said a reading with no Greek support and never said no support, then you could understand why the mistake would be completely on White's shoulders, as he should have looked and found the ook reading. But in any event, he says that he doesn't seem to have gotten a secure grip on the issue. This is Snap, you know, not the most favorable critic of Dr. White's. He says he doesn't quite get a secure grip on the issue. In other words, from Riddle's discussion, he didn't realize that he wasn't talking about the Arga, he was talking about the ook. And therefore, to say that White advocates for the ook and supports the ook is just a mistake. He wasn't discussing that. He didn't seem to notice it. He certainly didn't talk about it. He didn't discuss the support and say, yeah, I'm okay. Good. The Sahidic is good enough. It was good enough for the Sahidic. It's good enough for me. Absolutely not. So suggest that White adopts something with no evidence. Well, if you're talking about the ook, even if White did adopt it, which he doesn't, but even if he did, it wouldn't have no support. It would just have what I would view as quite weak support. And it would have no Greek support. That's not what Nick put in here. And on top of that, Dr. White doesn't adopt it. So, and ultimately, once this was clarified to Dr. White, as Nick has conceded, Dr. White came back and said, no.
It's just like seriously, if I could just say this to TurretinFan, you are just, this is what you're saying is absolute rubbish. Okay, you're trying to defend your friend, and you're creating tiny little inconsistencies that aren't even there. Just looking at language and saying, well, you said here that there's Greek evidence. The other place you said no evidence. See, that's confusing, or and that's a contradiction and all this sort of stuff. There's no contradiction there. Anyone who understands the basics of this issue, who doesn't have a bias, would read through what I've written and would see it very clearly. Now, the fact is that you're showing the wrong video. The fact is you will support James White no matter what. Now, what I find is with certain personality people, and this happens in cults, but it also happens in Orthodox groups where there are people with strong personalities that people defend. Some people are absolutely obnoxious. Some pastors, some leaders are obnoxious, but people will defend them no matter what. Okay, so what we find is usually there are those who protect these pastors and leaders. And so, say, for example, the New Earth tribe, they're a bit like a Bethel sort of group up here in Byron Bay. When you start talking about the leadership there and start questioning some of the things that they're teaching, usually it's they're sort of like bulldogs. They come at you and protect the pastor no matter what. So the pastor could have done something completely heretical or said something absolutely diabolical or done something really, really bad, but they will just 100% protect the pastor. Now, I've been in this mode when I was in a certain church. The pastor it wasn't until I found out the pastor was just completely lying to me and lying to almost everyone that I really had to question all that. And so I was defending pastors and but it just got to the stage where I couldn't defend someone lying like that. So it can be cognitive dissonance where when shown information about someone who you greatly respect, you don't want to believe it at first. And so this is going to be the unfortunate crash for TurretinFan, because he's completely defending James White here. And this is one of those places where it's indefensible. Like, James White's just lost this fight, tried to get out the back door with it, and we've all looked at it and just gone, wow, that was interesting. But it's like James White would have been better off just coming clean and said, yeah, I didn't know anything about it. And then for years I was just embarrassed by this whole conjecture thing that you guys kept bringing up. So then I had to admit that I don't follow them. I follow the Nestle Alarm. I follow the Tyndale House text there. And so we saw all this with our own eyes. But then it's like, the bulldog comes along and defend. And it's like, unfortunately for TurretinFan, it's going to come to the stage where he realizes that James White is toxic. And the thing is too, it's like, some of these guys who are critical text guys, they're not toxic. Okay. Sometimes I'm talking to people, we talk about, certain things, and some people are majority text people as well. And so, but most of them, they're against the Textus Receptus King James position. But a lot of people, I don't get this toxic type of flavor from them. But James White was like, if you were to go who wins the award for the last 20 years of being the most toxic guy against the Textus Receptus camp, or the confessional bibliology or ecclesiastical text guys, or King James only guys, or King James preferred guys, it's James White. And who behaved the worst and the most non-Christian behavior? James White. I mean, you could do that for the King James side, you could do it for the TR side. There's plenty of characters out there who have questionable things that they say and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, James White is up there, right up there, with being one of the most toxic people. Who I use him as an example. I'm like, when people talk about the poor state of Christianity, I say, well, just have a look at James White and how toxic he is. He is like the bar. That's the bar that's set. Most people say, let's get our bibliology from James White, read the King James only controversy, and that's why when we're dealing with people who follow James White like he's a guru, like Stephen Boyce and Wes Huff and these other guys, they're already in this mode, this James White mode. So we're dealing with all these little James Whites around the place who feel that it's their God-given right to be absolutely obnoxious to us because of the text that we choose, it's just amazing. It's amazing to watch, and it's amazing to be at the other end of James White when you first hand, like, it's another thing to watch someone like Jeff Riddle get smeared, or Robert Truelove and a whole bunch of other people over the years. He's just throwing mud at them and all the rest of it. But when you're at the end of that, see, what I would do, I would purposely say things to get a response from James White to see how honest he would be, and he would just lie. And people were like, how can he know that about you? It's a bit like, I remember there was a guy who was saying that this pastor in South Australia had left. I think he might even be in the chat, the guy who told me. Pastor in South Australia who left this church. And they said, well, they found pornography on his computer or something like that. And it's like, how do they know that? You know what I mean? Was someone going through his computer and went, hey, this is on there or whatever? And it's like, and how can you prove it or disprove it? Because there have been people who have just been smeared and lied about with that sort of stuff. Okay. And in this church, pretty much if you leave, it's like leaving the mafia. You get that, no matter what, there's going to be some excuse for you to leave. It's like, oh yeah, well, they did this and they did that, They'll just make it up. And so I've had that happen to me. And so firsthand, it's like, oh, okay. And so that's why I can, stand there. And I actually was offering $5,000 to anyone who could prove the claims that they were making about me were true. I said, I'll give you $5,000 cash. And no one ever came forward. But you have to sort of do that sort of stuff to defend yourself, And so with James White, it was like, same sort of thing, just getting smeared and slandered about and just called names and mocked and just told, people warn against you. Don't ever get involved with this guy. This guy's toxic. This guy's this or this. And you're just like, how are you getting all that with the limited bit of information that I've given you? And the limited, tiny little bit of information that you have about me. And then, I'd give a little bit more information. It'd be a whole Pandora's box of ad hominem attacks. And, the guy's just a liar. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And TurretinFan, if you're going to defend him, it's like, man, this is cognitive dissonance. And to see you trying to defend him and you're all scattered all over the place. Now, I know, sometimes we're doing back and forward videos that can go for hours and hours and hours. We can, miss, the cue or miss the link or, whatever. But at the end of the day, there's just so much that you're saying that is wrong about James White. That's just not factually true. And if I was to get, say, Jeff Riddle here, James Snap, and probably about 30 other people who were involved with this whole issue and just, stood them all up and had you on one side and them on the other, you wouldn't be able to say anything that you're saying. And so, so we got Brad in the house, Brad around the mountains, living the dream. And then we've got Helg says a real guru like James White should not be dependent on whether or not Jeff Riddle said this or that. Clearly enough in the video, a guru should be expected to have done his homework before posting videos. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, oh, let's just blame Jeff Riddle for not pointing out exactly where it was. It's like, okay. It's almost like saying, hey, George Bush, you realize that you just bombed this town in Baghdad and killed 30 civilians, and he gets the town wrong, and it's like, well, he obviously has no idea. You know what I mean? Like James White saying that he is the conjectural emendation guru, and he keeps pointing people back to his book, which is all wrong. And the thing is, why is TurretinFan all of a sudden like, oh, no evidence, all this, just pointing out these little ways of saying things as if, I wrote the thing. I wrote that book. Yeah, Jeff Riddle wrote that post. I knew what Jeff Riddle was talking about when he said what he said. And people have never had an issue with anything that I've said until now about what I've said, there's no evidence for. I mean, I was pretty clear. And when then in the context, I go into what the evidence is for a conjectural emendation. So I'm like, okay, these have no evidence. And it's like, yeah, but the thing is, James White, his evidence based issues are about the Greek. And so but Bart Ehrman and Bruce Metzger, they say any evidence makes it so it's not a conjectural emendation. So let me just read through what I've said, because the whole context is missed because we're just in hyper James White defense mode. Okay, so look at this. So we talk about these things and, James Snap and Jeff Riddle's issues here. Okay, so I'm like, Jeff Riddle reveals that 2 Peter 3:10. Then we go through the issue. Now, I'm just looking for the word evidence here that TurretinFan keeps going on. Yeah, I'm like, White advocates some very obscure readings with little or no evidence, including what he himself would consider conjectural emendations. Notice I'm saying this is what James White would define as a conjectural emendation, according to his standards. Then I talk about, Kenneth Siam, he's talking about conjecture, about Beezer. But notice, then I move on, and I'm like, okay, here's how, in Beyond What Is Written by Jan Krans, this is how Jan Krans defines conjectures, okay? So this is the book that James White told me that I should read about to know about conjectural emendations. So I'd already read through it. I went through it again because James White said to do that, so I did. And then I talked about the two different distinct ways that Jan Krans talks about conjectures, okay? And then I said White has placed confusion upon these two issues by several errors. Listen to this. Firstly, not being in agreement with his peers as to the definition of a conjecture, as found in a Greek manuscript, or as Metzger and Ehrman point out, any manuscript. So that's the difference. James White is talking about a Greek manuscript, where Metzger and Ehrman are talking about any manuscript, okay? And secondly, conflating this issue with the conjecture of Beezer, which was derived from the rational argument of nomina sacra. Okay, so that's a separate issue. But when you look at the first issue that I've talked about, I'm clearly saying that Metzger and Ehrman, they're saying, well, it's not actually conjecture if it's based upon some evidence. And so I'm pointing out that James White is saying no, it's conjectural emendation if there's no Greek evidence. So that's pretty clear. So I've made it abundantly clear that that's what James White is saying here, that that's what he's pointing to. But, you know, I can't help it if you don't want to go through this. And all I find is when you're reading through this, you're like, James White has placed confusion on these two issues. And then when you get to not being in agreement with his peers, like as if Ehrman and Metzger are his peers, he dedicated his book to Metzger. In 1995, when he was doing a debate with Theodore Letus, when he was alive, so not 1995, he wrote the book, but later on when he did a debate with, or an online, sort of like a phone call debate sort of thing with Theodore Letus, Ehrman was still considered an orthodox type of scholar back then. But he hadn't written, misquoting Jesus and all the rest of it. So when I'm saying that's his peers, I'm not mocking the guy. I'm just saying that's who he was learning from. After Theodore Letus, he studied Ehrman. And then that led to the Ehrman debate, because Ehrman came out and was all public about, his unbelief and everything. And then it was actually Theodore Letus pointing out that Ehrman was a bona fide scholar, saying that there were doctrinal differences between the Textus Receptus and the Nestle Alarm text. So you got to read through all this and think about it. I haven't just, put all this in here for no reason or just because I'm angry at James White. You've got to stop being hyper protective of James White. So Brad is saying, in reference to 2 Peter 3:10, some are preaching that Jesus will return to earth as being born in the flesh again before he comes as a thief in the night. What are your thoughts on that, please? No. Well, Jesus is already in the flesh. The Bible says in 2 John that he is in the flesh. And so I'll just get that 2 John KJV. For many deceivers are entered into the world who confess not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an antichrist. So the word has is probably a good modern rendition of that. But the word is represents the underlying Greek text, and that means that Jesus Christ is still in the flesh. When he resurrected, he was still in the flesh. And so he wouldn't be able to come back in the flesh again unless that other flesh died somehow. So it just sounds pretty wacky. So he will be human form again according to them. Well, he already is in human form. Born from man and woman again. Yeah, that's pretty weird. And so, that's 2 John chapter 1, verse 7. So let's get back to TurretinFan.
So in other words, Dr. White said, no, I don't adopt the ook. But the problem is this, even with the ook there, I say problem, the nuance here is that even with the ook, the meaning of the text, surprisingly, is largely unchanged, because the underlying meaning of the text is the same, and the ESV's translation. So,
I mean, I don't know how much TurretinFan knows about this verse, but this is, I mean, I'm going through an eschatology series at the moment, and this is a huge issue. This causes this verse to define the day of the Lord, what the day of the Lord is. There's some people saying, it's only, like, say, that Alan Kirshner, and he's a friend of James White, by the way, but he defines the day of the Lord as up till the second coming. We're clearly in 2 Peter chapter 3, when you read through that chapter, it's talking about the day of the Lord going right down to the end of the millennium period and the creation of the new heaven and new earth. That's the day of the Lord begins at the rapture and goes all the way through till then. And so Yeah, so it is a huge issue. It's if you don't have an eschatology, it's not an issue. It's sort of like I don't believe in miracles in the Bible, sort of thing. It's like, well, so when you see a verse that chops out a miracle, you're just like, yeah, it doesn't really affect me. It doesn't affect anyone. It's like, well, if you actually have an eschatology, it affects you. It affects the future, your understanding of the book of Revelation, your understanding of Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, the book of Daniel. There's lots affected by it. So, and especially 2 Peter 3:10.
Doesn't have a negative particle added because the meaning of the text remains the same, whether or not that Sahidic reading were put into the text. It'd be better not to put it in. It's an area where the Nestle 28 can be improved. And I'm happy to say that. I'm happy to acknowledge that there's an area where the Nestle 28 can be improved. And Dr. White agrees too on that point. But ultimately, the issue is not whether the ook should be there or not. Dr. White, confronted with the evidence, agrees it shouldn't be there. Now, will Dr. White...
Yeah, after being constantly confronted with the evidence, he agreed it was there.
Its critics, looking at the evidence for Revelation 16:5, presented by, we're going to look through all of, God willing, we're going to look through all the evidence that Nick offers and any other evidence we can find. At the end, if there's no good evidence to support Revelation 16:5, will the King James Version advocates drop it based on that? I hope, but we'll see. We'll see.
I mean, it's as we're seeing, like even just if you look at like some of the things I've just been doing today, I was just tidying up Revelation 16:5 on my website, and I was just going through, file, search, menus. Okay. The word manuscript, actually, it appears quite a lot. Let's make sure we've got it. Okay. Yeah, so even Beza, for why would he pass over to this place? So without doubting the genuine writing in this ancient manuscript, I faithfully restored the good book to what was certainly there, hosomenos. Okay. And so so Erasmus Schmidius said, but they were restored by Beza from an ancient manuscript of good faith. So he's saying that Beza had an ancient manuscript, okay, in 1658. Okay, I'm just trying to find the other ones that I did. Might have to go from the bottom. Here we go. I think I've gone through this already, but there was one other one. Was that Homo Halberstadensis? Yeah. Yeah, that does look like the only place. Or maybe, yeah, this one here. So I just did a Google Translate, which was actually pretty good. So, but it has here, Beza, however, followed by Henry Stephanus, Parius, Piscator, Amama, and more fully. So it's from Google Translate, just directly straight from there. Parentheses are used, kai ho esomenos, kai ozios, the text of E. Schmidus has. And so, okay, yeah, here it has kai ho esomenos, Beza, from the old, as he says, good, faithful manuscripts. So here's another witness to Beza. This is Bengal. This one here, Piscator et Beza. Anyway, I'm just at the moment just going through, just pointing out where people are saying that Beza had an ancient manuscript, which I do have a screenshot here, and I'm pretty sure this was in 1611. This commentary was written in Latin, but it was later translated into English, and it says, save in that stead of Erchomenos, which is to come before used, here it is Somenos, who shall be, as Beza hath brought to light out of an ancient manuscript. There's so much that point to this, and so you know, I don't know why TurretinFan hasn't jumped in and looked at all. You know, I guess he's going through my book, but I've clearly told him this information is not in my book. This came about later. It was actually came about before I dropped it, and then after I wrote my book, it came about again later. So anyway, let's just move on.
Or maybe we'll be shown that there is actually good evidence for Revelation 16:5. I would be very surprised at this point if we find it, but let's try to keep an open mind as we go through. I've seen that there's some ongoing chat conversations. Some of them are less on topic than others, but I will take a quick moment to read through them and see what I see, and then probably.
Okay, so I'm going to try and fast forward a lot of this.
Just sign off. So I see Patrick was here. Hi, Patrick. I'll just also at the same time as I'm going through here, thank everyone who has been following along. Thanks to Fred, Algo, Jason, Patrick. And I see Jason has a question related to regeneration. It's an interesting question, but definitely not on the topic of today's episode. Yes, there's a. What I would say on this point, Algo, is I would distinguish between the kind of regeneration that we speak of as the effectual calling is one kind of regeneration, and the remission of sins or forgiveness of sins is another kind of regeneration. So I would distinguish between those two different kinds. And effectual calling comes first, and then faith, it produces faith, and faith is the basis upon which our sins are forgiven. So, but the effectual calling is not based on our, it's not based on us, but on God who calls. Let's see what else. More discussion of that. Some nice discussion of people's experiences, which you could check out if you watch the live chat. It's not all happy. Continue to read down. Well, I hate to cut off those discussions because they seem to be going well, but unfortunately, I have come to the end of my material for today's episode, and I don't want to keep going on. So Michelle says, I read The Potter's Freedom a year ago. It's good. The reading The Potter's Freedom was how I first heard of James White. Actually, I had read it many years ago. Now it's many years ago. I'd read it, and then I thought, wow, this is really. I don't remember even how I got it, but I got it and I read it, and I thought, wow, this is really well written and powerful. Who is this guy? Who's this author? So I did my research and found out more about it. And that was my introduction to James White. I hadn't read any of his King James Only Controversy or his book on breathing or anything else, just The Potter's Freedom. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And I like the updated version of it. I don't know if he'll do any further updates because Norm has gone to be the Lord. So I don't know if there'll be any additional further editions of that particular book, but it's a powerful book, very interesting read. So not seeing any other comments on this particular episode, I will just add for Nick's benefit, Nick, I am interested, if you're interested in doing it, to do either joint or parallel episodes, which I've emailed you about at your email address that's available through your YouTube page. So.
And so, yeah, I guess you're saying my YouTube page. So I'm just going to check that because okay, my about view email address ozclicks@gmail. I haven't received anything. Maybe I'll just right now check and see if there's anything in the spam, or I'll just go to all mail. Okay. Maybe I'll type in Turretin. The last email is about unicorns that has been mentioned. Okay, I'll look in the spam. Sometimes these things can end up in spam. Nope, but I've won a lot of lottery lately in the spam. $17 million. Yeah. Okay, so I can't see anything in the spam. So I'm not sure what's happened there. So I would resend that, or I just simply haven't gotten it. Maybe there was something wrong with or maybe your email is a different name. But I can't. I'm usually pretty on the ball with emails of that type of nature, and I can't see anything relative to any. So I'll just type in maybe Catholic. Might come up in the Eucharist, Pinterest, MEV. Nope, nothing. So sorry to TurretinFan that I'm not getting anything whatsoever. So let's just continue.
So if you have a chance to check your emails, please feel to check that out. Otherwise, I'll try to reach you sometime through one of your lives to mention it there, if that's more convenient for you. In any event, thank you all for listening. And, I should add, as one last point, I would add, I'm critical of Nick's points on these, and I don't think he's saying the right thing. But I want it to be clear, and I'm not accusing Nick of lying. I think Nick is sincere in his comments. I just think he's wrong. I don't think Nick is trying to make this up. I think Nick has overstated some points, probably accidentally overstated them, kind of the way that Riddle, I think, accidentally overstated the issue of evidence for the reading at 2 Peter 3:10. It's not no evidence, it's just no Greek evidence, which is bad enough. And I think Nick mistook James White's response to Riddle as a defense of 2 Peter 3:10's main reading, which it wasn't. And
because you're showing the wrong video.
And he assumed that meant that Dr. White is in support of the Ook, which Dr. White isn't. He just hadn't realized that there was a reading there that had no Greek manuscript support, because he was focused on the conjecture question, not on the specific reading of Ook. So it's not a big error in the SLN 28, but it is something that could be fixed, something that could be improved. So I'm not trying to call Snap a liar. There's points I criticized Snap on, relatively minor things. There's something relatively minor I criticized Riddle about. I think Nick missed the mark further in his comments, suggesting that Dr. White advocates for conjectures when he doesn't. But I think it's a mistake.
I'm not saying he's advocating specifically for conjectures. What I clearly said was he was shown by Riddle, and he wouldn't admit it. See, in the next video, you see, he's talking about the Ook. Yeah, that is a conjectural imitation. And then we were, for 5 years, saying, it's sort of like, whoa, you've got a conjecture, and you're saying, King James people conjectures. This is the Achilles heel. This is the arrow that destroys King James onlyism and TR onlyism and all the rest of it. And so we were just laughing at him for 5 years, and then he's like, I don't follow those. And he had to wait until 2017 until the Tyndale House text, and he jumped on the board with that one.
He came by honestly. So I just put that out there. The point of this is not Nick is a liar or anything like that. I'm saying Nick has made a mistake, and I'm trying to make
haven't made a mistake.
That clear in the best way I can, and also just explain to Nick why I think what I think. So hopefully I've done that. I don't want to make it endless back and forth on this, unless Nick has some additional material he hasn't shared before. If Nick just wants to insist that he was right, I'll just let that go. I think this is an adequate refutation. From my standpoint, this is an adequate refutation. If Nick feels that there's something that I have missed or overlooked, I'm willing to listen. I've listened to the previous episodes so far, but including the most recent episode that Nick came out with a few days ago. So today's the 11th. So it would have been, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 days ago that Nick's last episode then. So I have listened to those episodes, but anyway, I appreciate everyone who's listening. Again, thank you for your time and consideration. God be with you all.
Okay, so let's go to the next video. So part 15.
Greetings, one and all, and welcome to another exciting edition of our response to Nick Sayers and his book, Revelation 16:5. The full title I've said so many times already, at least 14 previous times. This book we finally come to what I view as an interesting aspect of this book, beyond the level of interest we've seen before, because today we will actually deal with a witness that Nick sees as a favorable witness, and it's a witness of Revelation 16:5. It's not a Greek manuscript, but it's a reading that is found in many manuscripts, because we're talking about a work by Beatus of Libana. And Beatus of Libana created a commentary on Revelation, and in doing so, he also produced, apparently, either he or one of the people making a copy of his work, produced an illustrated version of this commentary on the Apocalypse. And people love pictures. This is coming after the introduction of images into churches in Europe. As this caught on, you start to see more and more people being interested in such things. Beatus of Libana is in the second half of the 8th century, so roughly at the time when this is emerging. I don't know if he himself put these illustrations in or they're put in thereafter, but the point is that these are not ancient in the sense of patristic era. These are early medieval works, but it's a picture book. So it's a commentary on Revelation, and it has pictures, and people like those things, and they tend to hold on to them, especially if the pictures are of, at least some interest. And apparently they were, because we have dozens of manuscripts of Beatus of Libana's commentary on Revelation, commentary on the Apocalypse. I think they found around 35-ish copies of this manuscript, and people hang on to them, not just because they're not just text on parchment, they contain pictures. Some of the pictures are more beautifully done than others, some of them are more fancy than others, but almost all of the manuscripts that are preserved are the ones that have pictures in them. So I think it was the pictures that people particularly liked, even more than the commentary itself. Now, that said, there is a commentary here, and it's something we need to address, because the way that Beatus handled this situation is he'd put the story, meaning the text of Scripture, and then the explanation of that text. So there's a text of Scripture he provides, and then his own commentary. And then as well, there's, at least in a lot of the surviving copies, there's also pictures. But we'll kind of set aside the pictures for now. I don't remember if he makes any reference to the pictures, but let's just focus on the text. Actually, a lot of the work that has been done on Beatus is more about the pictures, less about the text. Although, thankfully, one translator has gone through and provided a translation of the text into English. Unfortunately, it's only partially published, and that, as far as I can tell, is just published in English. Now, I'm talking about an English translation. There are apparently some other language translations out there. Like, I think there's a Spanish translation and a French translation and so forth. But in terms of a good English translation, a complete good English translation is still waiting, although the work of the translator who has done, the bulk of the translating is much appreciated, and I'm thankful for her work in that area. If you go to her blog, you can find her kind of current working copy of the Revelation 16 translation, it includes various notes to herself, I think, or to her editor, and it's not ready for prime time, as it were. But what's nice is it does provide with all the context that we would need to understand what's going on in Beatus's commentary. But before I get into that, let's listen to what Nick has to say about this subject, and then whatever he hasn't included, we will try to supply or clarify or address in terms of his arguments. Now, this is section 3.11, beginning at page 132. I see Doki Doki Bible Club is in the house. Good to see you, Doki. Doki. So, Spanish theologian Beatus of Libana, 730 to 800, wrote a popular commentary on the book of Revelation titled Commentaria in Apocalypsum. The date of Beatus' readings may go as far back as 360 AD, as Beatus relied on Tychonius' commentary on Revelation. So, on this point, I agree that he may very well have relied on, not just on Tychonius, but on a variety of previous commentators. And he even seems to recognize and have some familiarity with commentators he doesn't agree with. But so he has access to earlier writings. Now, whether or not he has adopted any readings, for that we would actually need to have some evidence. I think I've addressed Tychonius separately. If I haven't, hopefully I'll remember to come back and address Tychonius separately. So Tychonius, I think Francis Gumerlock is working on the reconstruction. I think he's completed a reconstruction of Tychonius's commentary. I say completed, like he's finished the project. I think there's a little bit he couldn't reconstruct. I don't recall what he had for Revelation 16. He might actually have the same reading there for Tychonius. I'm not sure. Whether or not it goes back to Tychonius or only goes back to Beatus is not really a major issue. And the reason why it's not a major issue is Beatus's Latin text is not the Vulgate text. So that's one of the interesting things about Beatus is he's using a Spanish text. Now I say Spanish, but I mean it's a text found in Spain at that time. This is before modern Spanish, the modern Spanish language is available. It's even before what we call Old Spanish. I think Old Spanish would be around the 10th century or so. So Old Spanish, it's a bit different from Old English. This would have been the time of Old English. But at this time, Old Spanish, or what was spoken in Spain at that time, was Latin, and it's a variant of the Latin that the Romans spoke. It's like a mutually intelligible dialect of Latin. So Beatus has a Spanish Latin text as distinct from Jerome's Vulgate text. And that's significant because he's going to have some different readings. Interestingly, he doesn't just have different readings here. He has different readings in many places in the book of Revelation. In some places, he has readings that are significantly different from the Vulgate Latin text. Now, as far as I'm aware, in no other places would we think that there's any preference or priority that should be placed on Beatus's reading over that of the Vulgate, over that of the Greek. But nevertheless, it is of interest. Now, there's one study I read on this from someone who was very interested in Beatus's Latin here because it's different from the Vulgate and different from the Greek, not just in this place, but in several places. And that person was trying to argue that this may have been translated not from Greek, that the underlying Latin text that Beatus is using may not have originated as a translation of the Greek, but as a translation of Aramaic. And I don't know the actual provenance of this Latin text.
Well, when I'm going through these declarations, oftentimes you see that in some of the more Semitic type languages, like Ethiopic, the Aramaic, the Arabic, you see kind of abrupt changes, or you see, something like with the Arabic, it just has eternal. You see differences in the sense where most of the Byzantine texts, they have the present and the past and holy. And so where some of these other ones, like including this one, has the present and the future and holy. And so, whether it's translated from some other text like that, that would be an interest. What I thought would be a good thing to do is basically get each triadic declaration, whether it's to do with I am Jehovah or to do with Revelation 16:5, whether it's past, present, and future, or whether it's just the past, or whether it's just the present, whether it's just the future, or whether it's a combination of past and present, or past and future, or put them all in a line and sort of see where the pattern goes, because you can see that on most of the Byzantine texts, it's like the present, the past, and holy, and so with this one, it's like the present, the future, and holy. So like my understanding of it being like a nomen sacrum, like perhaps people were writing the Sanctus or the Hagios, or actually, sorry, Esomenos, Osios, sorry, over the top of it, or perhaps it was a marginal note or gloss, and people were like, "Well, where do we put that?" So then they were putting it back into the text, and perhaps in other manuscripts it was in the middle or at the beginning, because it seems like it would be to Libanerus. It seems like the beginning part, or actually the middle part, which is the past section, which we would classify as the beginning part usually, if we just say, you know, past, present, and future. But yeah, so that's interesting as well. So these are all things that I guess in further studies that I continue to do, as I'm gathering more and more information from different places about Revelation 1:4, 1:8, 4:8, and 11:17 as well. We're able to do those type of things.
In the case of the Vulgate, we know that Jerome translated from Greek for the New Testament. So we know the provenance of that translation. We don't know whether the text that Beatus is using is a direct translation from the Greek or a secondary translation from another language. And that definitely complicates its value as a witness, but it's still witness. Whether or not it's complicated, you know, that's just something that determines how much weight we give to it, how much authority or value we assign to it, not whether it's some kind of witness. Let's see. Thank you, Doki Doki. We're still working on the library. I framed the library nicely in the camera, so it looks bigger than it is, I think. But anyway, I appreciate the comment. And Big Yehuda has an off-topic question. Well, feel free to ask the question. If it manages to fit into the discussion, great. If not, I'll try to get to it another time. But please feel free to put in the question if you'd like. So coming back to what Nick has to say here, he said, after talking about Tychonius' commentary, he says it was hugely widespread in Europe, and 31 manuscripts have survived. In fact, it's higher than that now. I don't know when Nick came up with this list, but there's now more than 31 manuscripts known. The most recently discovered manuscript, I thought, was the Geneva manuscript, and I thought that that's the one that he has a picture of in his text. You'll see, if you turn to page 134 of his text, you'll see a picture of the page of one of these manuscripts. As I said, it's an illustrated manuscript, so that's supposed to be the angel of the waters, and that angel of the waters is doing what the angel of the waters does. That's the illustration that's provided at this point in the text. And it makes for an interesting reconstruction for the people who are specialists in this area, trying to create a critical text of Beatus of Libena. Let's see. Do I know of any resources that depict Huguenot soldiers, civilians, and various persons in high quality from the 16th and 17th century? 16th century is more important. Short answer is no, I don't know. The place I would be thinking to look is in Merle Daubigny's book, but I don't recall if he has any images that are high quality there. Merle Daubigny, that's MERLED'_AUBIGNEY, I think. I hope I'm getting the spelling right, but you might check there. It might have some pictures. I don't remember the name of the book, but it's a classic history of, I don't know if it's Reformation history or just European history. It's a multi-volume work by Merle Daubigny, I believe. So I'll see if I can find it later. But right now, I'll just return to this. I'm not sure it has pictures, so it might not have what you need. But that's the only thing that comes to mind off the top of my head. Returning to this text, so he says it was hugely widespread. I don't know how hugely widespread it was, but it did travel around. There were multiple copies made, and many survived. And I think the reason why more survived of this, Big Yehuda asks Jean-Henri Merle Daubigny, probably yes. I believe so. So hopefully that helps. I don't know if that helps, but anyway, coming back to Nick. Again, I don't know how popular it was, but it was popular enough that dozens of manuscript copies have survived. As I said, I think they're valued for the pictures even more than for the text. And then he says, consider together the Beatus codices are among the most important Spanish medieval manuscripts and have been the subject of extensive scholarly and antiquarian inquiry. And then he provides a picture of a portion of the text. This is the beginning of the third angel chapter 16, verse 4, and it's the Latin section. Well, it's not just the Latin section, but it's the Latin section that's the story part, the actual text of Scripture upon which a comment is to be made. Then he compares Beatus. He takes an excerpt and he says, Beatus excerpt of Revelation 16:5 has, which has been and will be, and the context reads, just are you, which has been and will be, the Holy One. So he says it incorporates both readings, and will be and the Holy One. Then he says 31 existing manuscripts have the reading in Latin and futuras es, which is the exact equivalent to kai somenos, which is what Beza has in Revelation 16:5. The Beatus book, there may have been several hundred copies that have been lost in time. That's just totally made up. I don't think there's any. I mean, Nick is welcome to try to justify this.
It's just totally made up. Okay.
I don't think that you can just assume that if we have 31 copies, there must have been hundreds originally. That's not sound reasoning. That's just wild speculation.
Wild speculation. I mean, we're talking about people who estimate that there could have been hundreds of thousands of Greek manuscripts. And the vast majority of them are just lost in time. And, I do provide an example of the Complutensian polyglot, and that's only 500 years old. So we're looking at a text that is not just 1,000 years old, but it's 1,200 years old, even older, 1,250 years old. And so we've got 31 existing today. So natural 35, as TurretinFan's say. So naturally, you would assume that there was more of them. You know what I mean? It just makes sense that these, would have been parts of those 1 million biblical manuscripts destroyed that Dan Wallace talks about. And so it's not wild speculation. I mean, if Dan Wallace had said this with authority, if James White had said this with authority, it would have been like, oh yeah, well, that's an interesting thing. But it's just wild speculation. It's like, and let's look at what I said. 31 existing manuscripts have the reading in Latin and futuris est, which is the exact equivalent of kai somenos, which is what Beza had in Revelation 16:5. With Beatus's book, there may have been several hundred copies that have been lost in time. So would you say that it's wild speculation for me to say that there may have been several hundred copies of this? Because you have 35 in existence. And so this, obviously they're not all, dated, what's it, 786. But that's when it was written. That, some of them are 11th century, 12th century, 13th century, etc. But you would assume that there's more, there was more than or they only ran 35 of them. I mean, this was a well-known text. It's well written about, and I just don't understand why. I guess in a way I see TurretinFan hasn't really hung around some of these text critic guys like Peter Gurry, Elijah Hixson, who, if I made that type of statement with them, they would be like, yeah, that's probably a reasonable estimation that, for something that's, like 1,000 years old or 800 years old or, 1,200 years old. Yeah, you'd probably say, okay, we've got 35 of them existing today. To say that there may have been several hundred copies of these. So several hundred is 200 or more that have been lost in time. And so it's just that's just made up. That's wild speculation. It's like, I just don't think TurretinFan knows the extent of how many of these manuscripts have just gone and they just disappeared in time. So anyway, I'm not sure why that was such an abrupt, evaluation of that, but let's continue.
And his basis for that is comparing it to the Complutensian polyglot, which printed 600 copies and only 123 still survive. And he's using that to suggest that in 500 years, you lose 80% of the copies, and that there'd be worse loss for older manuscripts. Anyway, he says that depending on how you count variants, this would mean that the reading of Shaltby appears here.
Okay, so it's sort of, Nick defends that by this. Just think about that. You know what I mean? Like just skip over it. I know he might go back to it, okay, but so we can see from that example that in just 500 years, a massive printed book like that can lose almost 80% of the copies. So how much more for older manuscripts? I think that's a reasonable argument. If you've got 600 copies of the Complutensian Polyglot, only 123 survive to this day. If you do the math, it's about 80%. If you were to go, say 35 manuscripts, is that if that's only like 20% that remains from an original 80%, you would say, okay, well, yeah, that amount of copy, and I've just put that in there for people, I guess, who are, who would sort of act like TurretinFan has acted. It's like, well, what? That's just amazing, But for people who are text critics, people who, let's say someone like James Snap Jr., he wouldn't have any beef with that. I don't think anyone would have any beef with saying, yeah, there may have been several hundred of these. If you got 35 of them, and they're ranging back from 800, 900, 1000, 1100. I'm not sure exactly how old the oldest one is, but it's like this older manuscripts. You would think that 80% would get up to 90, 95%. So to have a whole bunch of them would usually say that there was a whole lot more of them in the past. So anyway, let's continue.
62 times in 31 manuscripts. So I don't know how he gets to 62 times in 31 manuscripts as opposed to 31 times in 31 manuscripts, or even how he has decided that all these manuscripts have the same reading. I don't know. There's no evidence that I can see here that he's investigated this with a critical edition of Beatus.
I'm not aware of a critical edition of Beatus. I think TurretinFan just said that there was something that came out recently with something like that. And so this is in 2019. Most of this was written in 2015. It was made an article in 2016 and put into print in 2019. And so, but I think all the Beatus readings have this Futurist S reading. This seems to be the consensus of, this seems to be the conclusion of Hermann Hoskier, who compiled all the manuscripts of Revelation and put that into his 1929 book on the Apocalypse. And I get the 62 number because it appears twice. So it's in the margin, and it's, in a sense of the margin, it's in the commentary and it's in the main text. And so, unless TurretinFan's got a good reason to show me that the readings are simply different in these 31 or 35 manuscripts that he's got now, he would have to show me. He's sort of like, well, I haven't shown him evidence that they're all saying the same thing. Well, I didn't find any evidence to say that there was contradictory manuscripts. Most of the stuff that I read, and there's a very limited information, even up until 4 or 5 years ago, there's so much more that's just pouring on the internet. Like say, for example, Revelation 16:5. I was just going through that. Now, I just decided yesterday I was going through something, and who was it? It was where are we? Thomas Aquinas. He has this here. For there is said of him, so this is a proper translation by a guy called Hannon. So you have Moretti and Hannon. So you have the link here. Because I thought, well, there's bound to be a ton more information than I had access to, 4 years ago. So I'll just start looking it up. So started looking it up, and I've already found like 4 or 5 that I could put in the book. So here's one that I was able to get time to just throw on my website. So this is a commentary on the divine names of Blessed Denis. So in Librum B Dionysi de Divinus Nominibus Expositio. And it says in section 661 in the Latin, it says, for there is said of him, this talking clearly about God. I might read the whole thing. Then when he says, and on account of this, from the eloquencies, he infers a conclusion from the things said, and he says that on account of this, that God is the principle of all things. In sacred scripture, God himself, who truly pre-exists all things, is praised in many ways according to every ratio of existing things. For there is said of him, what was and is and shall be, through which there is understood what has been made, that is the past, and what is made, that is the present, and what shall be made, that is the future. And so Thomas Aquinas, you can go and check this out here. So where was that? I think it comes up in like a green, boldened, or maybe it doesn't. So what was I actually looking for? I was a search for, I think I'll just search for that. It should come up somewhere. Yep, it's on that website. Okay, might have to look at the Latin. It's et futuristas, which is pretty interesting. Okay, here we go. It appears here. Here. So it has quod erat et est et futurus est. So very interesting. It's like, okay, so that we're looking at something that, as far as I can tell, is from Thomas Aquinas, and he's talking about Dionysius on the divine names. So I'm going to investigate that a bit more, but I just sort of put it straight here. And it clearly says, for there is said of him what was and is and shall be. So it's said of God. This is said of God, okay? But the amazing thing is, like, I'll show this to Turretin fan. He'd be like, oh, well, it's not talking about where's Revelation 16:5 there. And it's like pretty much almost absolutely the identical reading in Revelation 16:5, except the is and was are around different ways. So you'd expect someone to be paraphrasing that. I always paraphrase it in that way. I hardly ever get it right and go, which is and was and shall be. It just sounds very clunky and awkward, and I have to move my body in this way to remember it, though which there is understood what has been made, that is the past, And what is made, that is the present, and what shall be made, that is the future. I mean, it's pretty clear. And this is on the names of God. And so, reading through the context of that is very important as well. And so, so I would encourage, TurretinFan to look into that one. That's another one that I could just throw up there. So, but let's continue.
From more recently in the 1700s, and I'm not sure how thorough the 1700s critical edition was in terms of identifying textual variants. How, there is actually Grayson, I think in 2003 or so, has produced a critical, I think it's 2003, maybe it's not, maybe it's 2012. He produced a critical edition of this work. It is out there. I don't have a copy handy, and maybe it would be interesting to look. But I think for our purposes, it makes more sense to let's just assume that it's actually what was in Beatus original. Because there's not a lot of doubt. Well, we'll come back to why that matters in a little bit later. And it says the fact that the commentary leans on a 360 commentary also speaks volumes. And then he says, here's a later English translation. And then he shows the picture that I already showed you. And he says the words in Latin, et futuris es, or shalt be, appear twice in this picture at Revelation 16:5. Above and below are pictures from one of the 31 editions. And then you see a close-up of the text in the main body of the text, and then the verse in the commentary section of the text. Oh, I see, that's how he's getting 62 from 31 manuscripts, is that it's in the main text and in the commentary section of the text. And then he says, Beza most certainly knew of the Beatus reading, as the commentary, it was a widely popular commentary. In the age of Beza, the Reformation Bible scholars were very deep readers of the early church fathers. Beatus copied Old Latin versions as early as the 4th century, which contained the reading of Somenos. Beatus was making a compilation that's preserving the work of Tychonius, who wrote his commentary on Revelation around 380. Besides this, the same reading was in Jerome. So there's a lot of confusion and error, unfortunately, in this. And I'll try to...
So there's a lot of confusion and error in this. So it's like, okay, here we go.
Unravel it a bit.
So here we have a very strong witness to the future reading of Revelation 16:5, but it's like, we're not going to focus on that and say, okay, well, that's a good point. He's got the future reading there. That's great. Let's just focus on anything that it's not. You know what I mean? Or anything that Nick lacked saying there, or maybe I said a date that was 360 and later on I said 380, and it's like, let's focus on those things.
So what's the best way to unravel all of this? I suppose the best way to unravel it is to start with this comment about Tychonius. Without actually, one of the challenges with Tychonius is you have to reconstruct Tychonius. You can't just assume that that because, among other things, he relied on Tychonius, that therefore this reading comes from Tychonius. That's just not a valid assumption. Tychonius wasn't his only source. It's not just a reproduction of Tychonius.
So TurretinFan's saying, okay, we don't have Tychonius. Tychonius is a reconstruction from things like Beatus of Labana. And so that's how we reconstruct Tychonius's book on, or commentary on Revelation. So we don't actually have his original documents. But then listen to what he says here.
Tychonius, that therefore this reading comes from Tychonius. That's things. So without actually, one of the challenges with Tychonius is you have to reconstruct Tychonius. You can't just assume that Tychonius, that because, among other things, he relied on Tychonius, that therefore this reading comes from Tychonius. That's just not a valid assumption.
It's not a valid assumption. So something that has a Tychonius reading in it, you can't assume that it's a Tychonius reading. Maybe it is a valid assumption. You know what I mean? Like, why isn't it a valid assumption? Surely it is Tychonius or it isn't. And so this could be. There's a 50-50 chance that this is. And I don't know with studying other works, like looking at Tychonius, how, what they're leaning on, or whether they're saying, Beatus of Libana is the best way to get to Tychonius. But at the end of the day, surely it's not an unreasonable thought to say, well, that could be Tychonius's reading.
Tychonius wasn't his only source. It's not just a reproduction of Tychonius. So there's that.
Okay, so it's not his only source. Okay, so what other sources did Beatus of Libana use?
So as much as I'd like to just staple this to the back of Tychonius, we can't do that. Now,
But we can't just go, okay, we dismiss Tychonius. So let's deal with Tychonius. We can't say that it's just Tychonius. There, I've said it. It's like, why are the vast majority of scholars saying that this goes back to Tychonius, then, if we can't say it goes back to Tychonius? What's the point? why would they say that?
He says Beatus copied Old Latin versions as early as the 4th century.
Okay. So let's read this all in context. This is the manuscripts. Okay, so I'm just looking for what he just said there. Oh, yeah, here we go. Beatus copied Old Latin versions as early as the 4th century, which contained the reading of Somenos. So I'm sort of saying here, I don't think that necessarily it comes from a Greek manuscript. I'm saying this comes from Old Latin versions as early as the 4th century. And so I think that would be... I'm pretty sure TurretinFan actually goes into why he doesn't think it's from the Greek. So that would be the logical conclusion. So anyway, let's continue.
We don't have evidence that he was copying Old Latin versions, plural, as early as the 4th century. What I think it is fair to say is that the text that Beatus was using was an Old Spanish, or pre-Spanish, Old Latin of Spain.
So now we're saying, okay, it's a Latin sort of dialect, Spanish dialect. So that's sort of not really that important. I guess it's like, it's sort of like a Spanish, it's sort of like a hybrid thing. So we can't really, it's not that good. It's like, well, why is it inferior? It's in Latin. So regardless of whether it's got Spanish overtones or German overtones or French overtones or whatever, it's in Latin. Anyway,
Version. So from the peninsula that's now Spain, there was a version of the Bible that was in circulation there at that time. Beatus was in that part of the world, and he had that copy of the Book of Revelation.
Okay, so let me get this clear. TurretinFan's saying that if I say Beatus most probably got this from Old Latin versions, then it's like no, there's nowhere that it says versions. So okay, so we have to say probably one. We can't assume that there's he looked at more than one manuscript. And it's like, well, no, it was a Spanish one. It's like, yeah, but it was Latin. It's like, yeah. So he did go to Latin. So let's just rewind it and see exactly what TurretinFan said.
And that part was a version from the of the text that Viatus was using was an Old Spanish or pre-Spanish Old Latin of Spain.
Just a Latin
version. So from the peninsula that's now Spain, there was a version of the Bible that was in circulation there at that time.
Okay, so in the peninsula that's now Spain, there was a version getting around there at that time that was Latin.
Yeah, this was in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And he had that copy of the Book of Revelation.
Okay, so the only difference between what I've said and what he said is that I've said, Latin manuscripts. So it's a bit like me saying, well, I think that, this codex used older Greek manuscripts. It's like, no, a Greek manuscript. So, okay, yeah, whatever. He's going, okay, it's Spanish, but it's still Latin. And then he's saying that's what British used. It's like, yeah. Yes. It's exactly what I'm saying.
Evidently. Or he had it from a copy of a previous commentary that he was using as a base commentary. Possibly it's Tychonius, is his base commentary. But
well, most of the experts in this field say it is Tychonius.
But in any event, Viatus has a text. And his text, as I mentioned, it's idiosyncratic in the sense that it departs in a number of interesting places. I don't think there's necessarily...
So you notice that TurretinFan's sort of said nothing there, but he said about 6 things negative. That it's like, what's the point? What is the point of saying all that? I just don't understand how he can read through what I've said and just sort of go, okay, well, I disagree with this, I disagree with that, and I disagree, and it's like, okay, is it related to Tychonius? So should I just assume that TurretinFan is saying it's not related to Tychonius? Well, he's not saying that. But he's sort of, because I've said it, probably not, and then I've just made the claim down here. Beatus copied old Latin versions as early as the 4th century, which contained the reading Asomenos. And so, obviously, with the context that I've talked about Tychonius, Beatus was making a compilation and thus preserving the work of Tychonius, who wrote his commentary of Revelation. And so there's really nothing wrong with what I've said there. Beatus copied old Latin versions as early as the 4th century. So regardless of whether it was, 4th century manuscripts, Tychonius had his text and his commentary. So he's copying those. He's copying commentary and he's copying text as well. And so it appears in both. So we can assume that going back to the 4th century of Tychonius, which is where people are saying that he got his readings from, to say that Beatus copied old Latin versions as early as the 4th century, which contain the reading Asomenos, is not, it's not strange, it's not weird. That is the logical conclusion of someone who's done a commentary on the Book of Revelation that is preserving the work of Tychonius.
The time or need to get into all those right now here, but it departs in a number of places from the Vulgate text. So we know it's not the Vulgate text, although he's late enough that he could have seen the Vulgate text. I don't recall reading anything saying that he interacts with the Vulgate text, but he's late enough that he could have had Jerome's Vulgate text. It had been out for centuries, but he wasn't working from that. He was working from an old Latin text. As I said, it's this Spanish.
So he's working from an old Latin text. So I said he's working from old Latin versions. You can't say that. Yeah, it's like, and it's Latin, but it's Spanish. It's Spanish. Let's just mix it up a bit. Yeah, it's I mean, yeah, I wonder how old Spanish is. Let's just have a look at Spanish language and see how old this is. It's a global language. Look at this. The oldest Latin texts with traces of Spanish come from the mid-northern Iberia of the 9th century. So before that, they were basically speaking Latin. Okay, let's maybe look at the history. Okay. Etymology, history. The Spanish language evolved from Vulgar Latin. So it's like saying you're speaking English, but you're speaking, Australian English or British English or Irish English or American English. It's just you speak English. And so to say it, to sort of throw this, it's Spanish, as if that really matters. I mean, interesting. I mean, it's in Spain. So I guess, to point out that it's Spanish, it's like, okay, yeah, cool. I'm just looking at some of the older things about Spanish. No, it doesn't really go that much into it. Sort of hits the Middle Ages pretty quickly with that. But the very first thing that I saw was the oldest Latin text with traces of Spanish come from the mid-northern Iberia. From mid-northern Iberia in the 9th century. So around about that same time. It just started. So before that's basically Latin, and then it basically just sort of becomes its own little bit of Spanish, and then and all of the main European languages have the Romance languages have their roots in Rome, in Latin. So I just can't understand what's being sort of said here. So I'll just show you what I'm looking at. Okay, so you have an Ibero-Romance group of languages. Okay, so that came from the Vulgar Latin. So about the 5th century. Then the oldest Latin texts with traces of Spanish come from 9th century. The first systematic written use of the language happened in Toledo in the 13th century. So I'm just not really sure why this. It's like, it's Spanish. It's like, okay, that's cool, no worries. And so, we've got the language family, the Indo-European, the Italic, the Latino, Faliscan, the Romance, the Italo-Western, the Western Romance, the Ibero-Romance, the West Iberian, the Castilian, and then the Spanish. And so the earlier forms are Proto-Italic, Old Latin, Vulgar Latin, Proto-Romance, Old Spanish, and Early Modern Spanish. So we're looking at basically around this sort of era. I just don't see that it's going to really affect the text that much. And so the Ibero-Romance group of languages, let's just have a quick look at that. Commonly separated into West Iberian and Occitano Romance language groups, evolved from the Vulgar Latin of Iberia. And so, we can see where the Latin influence and Greek influence appeared. most widely spoken in Iberian Romance languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Catalan, Valencian, Balear, Galician. These languages also have their own regional and local varieties. Okay, so yeah, anyway, because it's just being brought up, it's like, okay, well, I'm not sure if I see a huge issue with it having any relevance to Spanish, but
strain of Old Latin. As far
it's a strain of Latin now.
as the
I mean, Latin scholars, they would clearly say that this is Latin. And so if you look at Hermann Hoskier, he would clearly say that this is Latin, that Beatus of Libana says in Latin these words.
The previous sentence, which says it says that he copied Old Latin versions which contained the reading as Somenos. So that's just completely speculation on.
Okay, so he's saying that I'm saying something that's completely speculation. Okay, so he's sort of jumping around here, but it's like, okay, 31 existing manuscripts have the reading in Latin and Futurus S, which is the exact equivalent to Kai Ho Somenos, which is what Beza has in Revelation 16:5. So he's saying that that is not true. So let's just listen to that again.
He's working from an Old Latin text. As I said, it's this Spanish strain of Old Latin. As far as the previous sentence, which says it says that he copied Old Latin versions which contained the reading as Somenos. So that's just completely speculation on.
Hang on, I think I've gotten the wrong place. That contained the reading of a Somenos. So he said it was a previous. Okay, here we are. Yeah, Old Latin versions which contain the reading of a Somenos. The reading is Somenos. Okay. So
Nick's reading as Somenos. So that's just completely speculation on Nick's part. We don't know what the exemplars had. And of course, a Somenos is.
Okay, so we've just got to assume that he copied this Latin text. So talking about the apocalypse, talking about, at the end of the apocalypse says don't add or take away from it. So it's, this is one of those books where people are like, pretty careful. But we've just got to assume that he copied a Somenos and just made it up, I guess. Maybe he had a conjectural imitation here, because I guess you're so used to, thinking that, anyone who has a TR type of reading is just making up conjectures. We just do that before breakfast. We just have a conjecture fest every day. And it's like, wouldn't you naturally assume he's got the reading in the commentary and the same reading in the text? So he has copied Old Latin versions that contain that reading. Or should we just assume that he changed that reading? Like, why would you not conclude? Yes, that goes back to earlier. How come when James White's talking about Sinaiticus, he can say, okay, well, this, we've got a clear line of transmission back to P75, and all this sort of stuff, when there isn't. But he can, if he finds a reading that's in Sinaiticus, in the papyri or something like that, that's, it goes back to that. But he would, that's one thing to say that, okay, because that's pretty wild. But it's another thing to say, okay, well, I think that this manuscript is a representation of a manuscript that came before it and has the same reading. That's all I'm saying here. Beatus copied Old Latin versions as early as the 4th century, which contain the reading of Somenos. And he's saying that's just pure speculation. It's like, why is it pure speculation? It has the reading. Is it just because you don't like the reading? And so on other things, he's talking like, say the word blood here. I think it's sanguis here. It says blood. Would I go, okay, would I be in error to say, well, the word sanguis there is not from an older manuscript? He's probably just either made a mistake, he made it up, or should I just go, well, he probably got it from an older reading, from an older manuscript? I just don't know why TurretinFan is saying this type of silly nonsense.
There's a Greek word, not a Latin word.
Oh my gosh. Of course, it's a Greek word. Okay, let's get James White's back. TurretinFan's going to hold me to account for saying it's got isomenos, which clearly, in the context I've said, kai isomenos is the exact equivalent to et futurus es. It means and shall be. Okay. So he's saying that because I've said this has the reading of isomenos there, like if I was reading the King James, I said, well, it says and shalt be. I mean, if I turned around 5 minutes later and said, the King James has isomenos there, you would know exactly what I was talking about. I'm talking about the future form. Okay. But if you do it with a Latin text, like as if I'm just confusing these, or as if I'm actually trying to tell people that isomenos is like a Latin word? Is that what TurretinFan's doing here? It's kind of really annoying. It's getting to the point where it's like, are you serious? Anyway, let's have a look at some of these footnotes of James White here at the Revelation 16:5 section, where he says, listen to this. And I really will enjoy when TurretinFan does a video against James White for saying exactly the same thing that I just said. Okay. He says, lest in desperation, this is on page 240 of the King James only controversy. Lest in desperation a King James only advocate make the attempt, Tischendorf's notes on the term only confirm my assertion. He notes that Cop 8th, so he's saying Coptic Ethiopic, omits ho'ozios. So am I to assume that Cop 8th and the Ethiopic has the Greek reading there and omits ho'ozios? No. It says, but the King James reading is not to be found even here, as isomenos is not put in its place. Instead, Tischendorf notes indicate that Beza is as the reading source. Further, Tregelles' text, though indicating some translations omitted ho'ozios, again indicates the King James reading is nowhere in the Greek manuscript tradition. Likewise, Hoskier's massive work on the text of the Apocalypse nowhere indicates the appearance of Beza's conjecture. Well, it does, and we're just looking at Beza's little Ibana, which is in there, but he's talking about Greek. Quite simply, before Beza, no Christian had ever read the text the way the KJV has it. So he's talking about the KJV. He's saying the reading of isomenos in the Ethiopic. Then he's saying the reading of holy in the KJV. So the KJV doesn't have ho'ozios. So how come James White's allowed to do that, but I'm not? And how come you're making such a big fuss about that? So let's just go back and see what TurretinFan has said. This is, again, it's like just throwing dust in the air. There's no, when he has sort of nothing of any substance to talk about, it's just, let's just throw dust in the air and just hopefully people will go, yeah, well, he made 15 points against Nick in that one. And it's like, there's just nothing there. Every single point I've clearly shown that it's just reasonable. And I'm actually pointing out where TurretinFan's good friend James White is doing exactly the same thing. And it's sort of a no-brainer.
And we have no reason to think the exemplar population, Old Latin versions, which contained the reading isomenos. So that's just completely speculation on Nick's part. We don't know what the exemplars had. And of course, asomenos is a Greek word, not a Latin word.
So I'm waiting for the video where he rebukes James White for using those Greek terms, and he's using them for Ethiopic. He's using them for the King James Version. It's going to be interesting to see TurretinFan hold James White to the same account that he does to me. And many times I'm going through this just saying, well, we're using the same language as James White. James White talks about Greek manuscripts, and then says there's no evidence whatsoever. So when we say, okay, 2 Peter 3:10, it's not in the Greek manuscripts, then we say there's no evidence whatsoever. You can't say that. Jeff Riddle can't say that. James Snap's wrong for defending you guys and all the rest of it. And it's like, why aren't you holding the guru of bibliology, the guru of the conjectural emendations to the same task as we're being held to? Why aren't you examining what he's saying? Is there just simply because you are biased and you are friendly with this guy and you want him to win this argument?
And we have no reason to think that there was a Greek word in there. I suppose he means the reading asomenos, meaning a Latin equivalent of the Greek asomenos.
Of course. Like, you seriously think that I'm saying that asomenos is a Latin word? Like, are you serious? And this is the thing. This is actually, like, because I'm slowing this down, going through point by point, and yet laboriously going through this, anyone who watches this will go, yeah, why did TurretinFan bring that up? Is he just, does he have any points against Nick here? Or is he just like, okay, let's just nitpick. Let's just go through and just, some of the grammar that he's used. He said it's a Greek word here when it's a Latin text. Okay, we'll make out that Nick was trying to say that the Greek word appeared in the Latin there. Or perhaps he wasn't saying that, but, and so people who are unaware, they would just listen to this and go, yeah, so I guess you got Nick on another point. This is ridiculous, and it's just a waste of time, waste of my time, waste of his time. Well, why go through these type of things?
We'll come back to that in a moment, or as far as whether this is equivalent or how it's equivalent. The next thing is that
I clearly state here. So he's taking me to task for saying it contained the reading of asomenos. Okay. Let me just, I'll just grab James White's book again. Where did I put it? Here it is. I'll just show you. Now, I know I read that footnote, but because I've got mine on the screen there. We want to be equal, and I want to show you exactly where this is said. Okay. So let me go to the big screen. Okay, so it has, lest in desperation, a King James only advocate make the attempt. And then he has on the next line, the cop eighth in the brackets omits osios. So the Ethiopic, would I say, the Ethiopic has the Greek word there. And then you've got, saying it doesn't have the King James reading is not to be found there, as asomenos is not put in its place. Are we, is James White saying that the King James has a Greek word there? Like, why? Why? It's just stupid nonsense. Waste of time.
Reformation Bible scholars were very deep readers of the early church writers. So
the Reformation scholars, This is going to be contested. Everything I've written is going to be contested. Just like, oh, Nick again is saying something so dumb. In the age of Beza, the Reformation Bible scholars were very deep readers of the early church writers. So am I to probably go, well, in the age of Beza, the Reformation scholars were not very deep readers of the early church? You know, what am I supposed to say there? Of course they were. They knew of Beatus of Libana. You know what I mean? It's anyway.
Beatus is not an early church writer. He's an early medieval writer. The early church period ended with around 750 when...
Okay, around 750 it ended. Have a guess. So this is another point. You know, Nick's wrong here again. He's not an early church writer. And so we've got to make sure that, you know, we pull Nick over the coals for this, because he is not classified as an early church writer, because his work, you know, in 750, and so we date this to, well, actually I don't have the exact date there, but I do just put it an estimation. The Beatus of Libana text is usually dated as 786, but I put 730 to 800. Okay, and notice he's saying around 750, so 786. So we're looking at, like, you know, 26 years later. Or was that 36? Yeah, 36 years later, and it's like cutoff point. Early church writings have stopped. You know, sorry, the gates are closed now, and you're in a different classification. And it's like, you know, I saw this with Alan Kirshner and the whole, you know, that the whole thing of, oh, find us any Koine reading with apostasia in it from 200 years before Christ or 200 years after Christ. And when you look at the era of Koine, it goes right up to 650. So, because they don't want to do that, because there are several readings, including in the Septuagint, which they lie about, which have a spatial departure with apostasia being used, and they don't like to talk about the one that talks about the rapture being used for apostasia, talking about a rapture in an apocryphal work, but it's in Koine literature. And so that's why they have this, you know, closing off of time. It's like, oh no, that's not a Byzantine manuscript, because the Byzantine era started around this time. So anything before that with a Byzantine reading in it is not classified as Byzantine, because the Byzantine Empire wasn't there yet. It's like if I say, oh, that papyri reading has a Textus Receptus reading, people are like, but the Textus Receptus wasn't around until Erasmus. It's like, you know what I mean. You know what I mean? And so here we are, we're going to throw this under the bus because of 36 years. And notice, but he said around that time. So I guess, you know, he could have been compiling this right up until that time and had it on his shelf for 30 years and then brought it out, you know, or then, you know, made it public. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But it's like, you know, apparently I've missed the cutoff point. So,
before Beatus wrote this text, as far as we know, and therefore he's not, you know, he's just outside that patristic era window. That said, I don't think it's unreasonable to think Beza might have had access to such a text. He might have.
Okay, you say he might have had access to it. So, but listen to he might have, but probably didn't.
In fact, if Beza had a copy of Beatus' commentary on the Apocalypse, it would have been an old manuscript, potentially. He could have said it's an old manuscript. And it would be an old manuscript.
Okay, so now we're seeing TurretinFan lay the foundation for when Theodore Beza said that he had an ancient manuscript of good report that he got the Isomenos reading from, that, oh, well, Theodore Beza was probably talking about this one. instead of, no, he's talking about clearly the Isomenos reading in Greek. He's not saying et futurus. He talks about the Latin and says it's foolish and divisional. Then he talks about he has an ancient manuscript with the reading of Isomenos in it. And that's how, all I have to do is just go to my website here. That's how that was interpreted by even this one here, written in 1611 in Latin, but translated later. It says, as Beza hath brought to light out of an ancient manuscript, the hot Isomenos reading. Okay. Beza didn't say that it says hot Isomenos and it's a Latin text. Okay. He was very clear about what he was saying. But TurretinFan's laying that little foundation there to go later on, well, how am I going to get around the Beza manuscript thing? Well, let's just say that it's he's probably talking about Beatus of Libana. But even then, he's admitting that it goes back to that, So either way, he has to admit that the Shelby reading is there. So in these 31, or he's now saying 35 copies of Beatus of Libana.
It is possible that those manuscripts were in existence at the time. Beza could have had access to them. I think it would be more interesting and more persuasive if there was evidence of Beza citing Beatus on anything at any time in his life. In other words, if you showed that Beatus had...
I think that would be very easy to do. I'm pretty sure that Henry Stephanus, who was the main printer of Theodore Beza, because he printed like hundreds of works. And so I'm pretty sure he actually printed some of Beatus of Libana's writings, because I remember going back and looking at some old material and going, oh, this is printed by Stephanus. It was Henry Stephanus, if my memory is serving me correctly. So maybe I can just write that. Stephanus and Beatus of Libana. Okay, let's just have a quick look and see if Stephanus comes up. Okay, so showing us a lot of the manuscripts, copies of the manuscript. Okay, 35 surviving copies. Okay, but we want printed editions. Commentary on the Apocalypse. So there's way more information on Wikipedia than was back in my day. I'll just click on this one. It might have something in the preface. Sometimes you just see a name where they're giving thanks to people earlier. Maybe I can search for it. Beza. Nothing of Beza. Stephanus. ST. No, I can't see it, but it might be a searchable document. Anyway, that's something I'll look into. Actually, World Catalog would probably have that information. So if I shut that down, go to World Catalog, and we go to Beatus. Beatus of Libana. should show us the earliest printed texts. Okay, so I'll open a couple of these. It's quite a lot of different editions, but okay. Maybe I'll just go to Beatus. Desiderius Erasmus. So are we saying that Erasmus actually printed Beatus of Libana's books? Christian Humanism, Reformation, Selected Writings of Erasmus with the Life of Erasmus by, oh no, that's Beatus Renaeus. That's a different guy. He was a scholar that helped Erasmus with a book in 1515. So we want to find Beatus of Libana. So who is this searching for? Beatus of Libana. Okay. Anyway, you can see I'm getting a bit scattered here. Let's just continue.
Quoted from, sorry, that Beza had quoted from Beatus elsewhere in his notes. For example, if he sometimes said, well, the text says this, but Beatus says that, then that would show that he'd seen Beatus and he was taking into account what Beatus said when he was doing his work. It's possible. Just because something's possible doesn't mean that it happened. It also doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm just saying we know that's out there. Now, as far as in the age of him, the Reformation Bible scholars were very deep readers of the early church writers. Yes, but of course, there was an emphasis, a very heavy emphasis on the Greek. That doesn't mean they ignored the Latin, but for them, Latin was like English is for us today, in the sense that, yes, people publish in English for scholarly audiences, but they understood that the original wasn't English. They understood the original, or for them, Latin. They understood that wasn't the original was Greek. So there was a preference for Greek. Now, whether or not he did or would have, if he had access to this Beatus reading, is a different question. I think it's fair to say.
So what was sort of said there? It was like, well, no, they focused on the Greek. They sort of read Latin like we read English. But what was actually said there, just in that section? I mean, Theodore Beza, he produced the premier Latin Bible that lasted for like 300 years before a type of Westcott and Hort sort of recension happened to the Latin as well. So for Protestants, Tremellius, Janius, and Theodore Beza worked on the Latin, and they produced their text, and they had the et eris reading, the was and is and shall be reading in it, by the way. So he was an expert in Latin. He took over from Calvin, and he was known for his skill in Latin. So yes, he also knew Greek. He was a polyglot. He knew many languages. He did the French Geneva Bible and worked on the Geneva Bible. His text was the main one for the Geneva Bible. I'm just not sure what's being said here. Like English, Latin, they focus on Greek. Let's just listen to that again, and let's just see if this is anything at all. Let's just let TurretinFan's speak for himself.
So there was like, yes, of him, the Reformation Bible scholars were very deep readers of the early church writers. Yes, but of course, there was an emphasis, a very heavy emphasis on the Greek.
Okay.
That doesn't mean they ignored the Latin.
It doesn't mean they ignored the Latin. I mean, like just a basic cursory Google search into Theodore. Oops, spelled it wrong. Beza. Okay, so let's type in Latin. Early life. in 1548, he published a collection of Latin poetry, Juvenilia, which made him famous. And he was widely considered one of the best writers in Latin poetry of his time. So that's way back, before he took over from Calvin and all that. Some cautioned against reading biographical details in his writings. Philip Schaff argued that it was a mistake to read between his lines that he never intended to put there, or to imagine offences which he was not guilty even in thought. Okay, so he's writing this Latin stuff, and people are saying that he's legendary at it. So I'm just not sure what TurretinFan's getting at. Okay, so and in every edition that he did, he had the Greek, or in his first edition, which was a Latin Bible, okay, with a Latin commentary which talked about the Greek words behind that Latin Bible. That was his first edition in 1556. Then in 1565, he did a Greek edition with the Latin parallel, okay? And then and he talked in Latin in the Annotationis, but he talked about the Greek, and sometimes he would mention about the Latin, like say in Revelation 16:5, he's like, well, the Vulgate is, it's foolish and divisional here because of this and that. And he's like, and the Greeks, pretty much the same. And so he's talking about both. So 1565 was his second edition, but it was his first Greek main text edition. And then in his 1582, that was the first time he incorporated the Somenos reading. But that was from then on, he usually had the Greek text, then he had his own Latin text, then he had the Vulgate text, so you could look at that as well. And so we're looking at a time when the Clementine Vulgate was done as well, which was in 1592. And so Theodore Beza was seen as the main Latin scholar of that whole era. So anyway, let's continue.
But for them, Latin was like English is for us today, in the sense that, yes, people publish in English for scholarly audiences, but they understood that the original wasn't English. They understood the original, or for them, Latin. They understood that wasn't the original was Greek. So there was a preference for Greek. Now, whether or not he did or would have, if he had access to this Beatus reading, is a different question. I think it's fair to say.
So I'm not sure what all that was about. Did he have access to this Beatus reading? I mean, to me, it's like saying, did Erasmus have access to Thomas Aquinas? Did he have access to? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if when I looked at it before, I wouldn't be surprised if Erasmus wrote talked about these guys in his books. Even print, like say Lorenzo Vala's annotations that he printed. He prints like the text of Origin. He was going through printing lots and lots of different things. Either Aldus Manutius has done it, or Henry Stephanus has done it. These guys knew about Beza, and if these guys knew about Beza, then either Erasmus or Stephanus Senior or Theodore Beza knew about it. So
his notes at 16.5, he doesn't mention by name Beatus, but certainly Beatus is out there. So it's important. It is something that's potentially available to Beza. There's nothing stopping him from having access to it. There's dozens of manuscripts that existed at that time and still exist today. So let's see. What else? He says it was a widely popular commentary. I don't know if it was widely popular amongst the Reformation era intelligentsia. Francois Lambert had already published his commentary, and that was printed, so it would have been more accessible to people like Beza. Did he refer to that? I don't know. Did he pay attention to what that text had to say about this topic? I don't know. Was Beatus on his radar? I don't know. Now, as I said, it would be an interesting point to try to dig in. It's not enough to just say, well, he could have had access, and therefore, close the argument there. You want to?
I think with this case, it is because he's just so popular. Okay, so I'll go through. I'm just on the side, just trying to find some cursory thing with Theodore Beza in it. and also Beatus of Libana.
If you want to close out that argument, it'd be useful to actually track down and see what he said. So, and again, likewise, when we say that that there's 31 manuscripts, or I think if the numbers might be now 35 or even more, then it's important to say, well, not just to say, well, it's 61 because that's, or sorry, 62 because that's twice 31, and in one of the manuscripts or one of the copies that he has here, it appears twice. It appears in the story, in the text of scripture, and then is repeated again in the commentary. I think it's useful. That's an interesting point, but it's not in terms of the way that you would count that for the usage by Beatus, that would mean it's in 2 out of 2 places, Beatus has this particular reading. So that's how it would normally be counted. You wouldn't normally count it based on the number of copies of Beatus. You'd normally count it based on the number of places in Beatus where it's mentioned.
Well, it just depends. If this is a biblical text with the commentary, most people wouldn't count the commentary as part of the biblical text, but they would count the biblical text. And so Andreas's commentary on the book of Revelation, most of them are seen as separate manuscripts. And I guess, to say, okay, we've got this one reading that's backed up by so-and-so, B, Aleph, Alexandrinus, etc. But we do use it in another sense where we point out there's 1,637 manuscripts that have the last 12 verses of Mark and only 2 that don't. And so when I use that type of language, it's pretty much universally accepted that we just don't go, well, there's one reading, or there's 2 readings, and one is attested by lots of manuscripts and the other one tested by a few or whatever. I know some people try to summarize it like that, but having those numbers there, I don't think anyone really shrills at that. If I say there's 31 manuscripts of Beatus of Libana, 35 apparently now, and they have that reading, there's 35 manuscripts with the attestation. I mean, see, the thing is, TurretinFan will acknowledge that most of the Byzantine texts are rubber stamped. That's why most of the time in the apparatus, it's regulated to just a BYZ at the bottom of the apparatus, or sometimes an M for majority text. But you have, you can have 1,000 manuscripts that just equal a BYZ at the bottom of the page. Okay. So it's like all those equal that sort of thing. And so he understands that things can be rubber stamped in a sense of, in the Byzantine era, that they had scriptoriums. It's like this, here's the reading. They give them a reading and they pass it on to someone else. They would copy the reading. So most of these manuscripts are cohesive. Okay. Not in every case, that's not in every case, but the vast majority. That's why it is a huge majority, because they have these scriptoriums where they're just pumping these manuscripts out. And so TurretinFan, knowing that they're sort of rubber stamping them, obviously with the reading of Hosios, he's like, well, it's the majority. Look at this list of it all. But knowing they're all rubber stamped, why is he allowed to show, well, this manuscript has it, the next one has it, oh, the next one has it, and go through, I think it's like 350. I think there's about 200 relevant Revelation 16:5 readings or manuscripts that have that section in it. And how come he can go through a list and say, see, it's in this one, see, it's in that one, see, it says holy there, holy there, holy there, holy. How come he's allowed to count all them, but I'm not allowed to count the 31 here? You know what I mean? It just seems like he will do something and it just seems natural, and I'm accepting it and going, oh yeah, cool, you're reading through that, cool. I've heard this before, blah, blah, blah. Hoskia's got lists of that. And but that's fine. You're doing what you're doing. But then when it comes to my turn, oh, no, you can't classify it in that way. It's like, oh, okay.
And in this case, 2. So it'd be 2 out of 2 have this particular reading. So now the question is, what about all the other manuscripts? Aren't those more instances of the same reading? Well, yes and no. There's no reason that's been given for thinking that these readings in the 31 manuscripts that he's identified have any other origin than what Beatus originally had in his original. So in other words, it's not that we think that Beatus had something else and that scribes independently came and altered the text independently and came up with 31 independent witnesses to this reading. Instead, the thought, or the assumption at least, is that these are all traceable back to an original and that the original had the reading that's there. But what about the claim that this is, what was his wording? Let's see. He says, well, we talked about the speculation about what percentage of the manuscripts this was. There might have been even more. Certainly there might have been more. There probably were at least a couple more. Books do get destroyed over time, but we don't know how many. But what about this? It says, this is the exact equivalent to Kai o Hislamenos, which is what Beza has in Revelation 16:5. So, first of all, to say it's the exact equivalent is a mistake. You should say it's an exact equivalent, because he's already presented you in his book with 3 or 4 different ways to convey this point. In fact, the one from Alcuin that he has offered you had et eris.
Okay, so if I have in the King James will be, like say in the KJV 2023 edition, it has which is and was and will be. Now that would be considered the equivalent of which art and wast and shalt be. But one's just written in a different form of English, and that people can still understand, but the other one's written in a more modern vernacular. And so I can't understand why TurretinFan's going down this route when clearly you've got an infinite number of ways to get to the number 5. 3 plus 2 is 5, 4 plus 1 is 5. And so as long as it equals the same thing at the end, it shouldn't really matter. And Latin is a translation of the Greek, okay? So even in the Greek, we do see differences at times, okay? But when you've got a translation, so you might have someone translating the Greek in the year 200 into the Latin, and they use certain words, and then 300 years later, some of those words might have changed meaning a little slightly, and so they're using different words, and then they might become popular again. They might become in vogue again, so they use those other words again, and so you might see something different in a commentary. You might see something different in the main text, but it's like, as long as they're equaling the same thing, what's the big deal? So he's trying to make a huge deal out of this, where it's like, why? Well, again, why?
Yes. And this one doesn't have et eris, it has et futuris es. So it's actually different from what was offered in the previous one. And eris, I think, is what Beza had. Let me just double check my notes on that point. When Beza provided his Latin, he had, actually, I think I could just share this. Let's see. How do I do that?
I mean, even in English, if we were to look at the Wycliffe version, the Tyndale, all the way through to the King James, there's so much variation, even in just spelling and things like that, and just the way that some words are. And you can say exactly the same thing using different words. And so the Latin is a translation. I'm not sure why TurretinFan's going down this route. But I guess he's got to get his, Nick's wrong on these 15 points, and he's not really dealing with anything of major substance.
Go ahead and present, share my screen. Let's see, that's the right one. Yeah. So you can see that Beza's Latin has Justus S, qui fuisti, oh, sorry, not Beza's Latin, Beatus of Libana has Justus est qui fuisti et.
Okay, so Docky says, hey Docky, I got a hold of a small booklet by C.H. Pappus in defense of the authenticity of 1 John 5:7. Have you heard of this one? Yes, and so Pappus is fluent in Greek, and so I actually haven't read that one, but I've been recommended it, and so that deals with the grammatical argumentation for 1 John 5:7 as well, which is pretty good as far as I'm aware. I've read some commentary on what he's written, and so but yeah, so he would conclude the same as Georgios Babiniotis or Eugenius Vulgaris, that there is a solecism in the text. And so yeah, so that's one that I really would want to get into, but I haven't had time. Okay, so let me know how you go with that. That's really good that you're getting into that. Okay, so TurretinFan has it written here, Justus est qui fuisti et futurus est sanctus, and then he's got, okay, the TR says Justus est Domine qui est et qui eris et qui eris et qui eris, and then omit, and then the OG saying, the original Greek says Justus est qui est et qui eras sanctus. But what we're dealing with is the future form here, okay? And he's saying, there's a difference. Et futurus est is different to et qui eris. They equal the same thing, Truden. So what's the point?
Futurus est sanctus.
Now, I know that I will point out at times that the exact wording is used, but if we're looking at a translation, yes, it's great that if Theodore Beza did a Latin translation and it matches up exactly, that's great. But if we have something that is verbatim, in a sense of like Bryan Ross would say, has verbatim identicality, where it's saying the exact same thing but just using different words, what's the big deal?
The TR, namely Beza, has Justus est Domine, qui est et qui eras et qui eris. So here we have two, qui fuisti et futurus est, and
just like sometimes we have and will be or and shalt be. They're saying the same thing. You just got to know if TurretinFan is fluent in Latin. Great, you can tell the difference between these two and talk about how it's wrong and talk about how we're making a huge mistake here. But yeah, even Herman Hosky is like et futurus est. That means that's the equivalent of the Textus Receptus reading.
In the TR, we have qui est, qui eras, et qui eris. And then the OG is the original Greek, but translated into Latin. And that's Justus est, qui est, et qui eras sanctus. So now, in fairness, there are multiple ways to translate between Greek and Latin. And the fact that there's one way that's qui eris versus another way that's futurus est, that doesn't mean that they're translating from different Greek readings. Also, as I said, we're not 100% sure that Beatus of Libana's Latin was a direct copy from Greek. It could have been a copy via another language. There's some speculation out there, and Nick may be aware of that, but there's some speculation about the idea that this was not a translation of the Greek, but that it's different from that and it's sort of independent of the Greek. I think some of those are wishful thinking on the part of scholars, but the point is there are significant differences. There's also some significant similarities.
There are significant differences. So he's saying this is a significant. No, notice the wording of TurretinFan. Like this is sort of where I guess just going through his material, oftentimes he'll just make a tiny point like this, like say the whole thing about me saying, oh, there's no evidence for this reading whatsoever. He's like, what? There is evidence. And it's like, well, of course I'm using the definitions that I'm in the middle of explaining. Greek, I'm talking about the Greek. And then he's like, takes Jeff Riddle to task over that. And he's like, this is a huge deal. And it's just a nothing. It's just him not being able to see, the forest through the trees. And here he's saying this is significant. This is a huge difference. And so I guess people could go to my, KJV 2023 and say, will be and will be is a significant difference from and shalt be. Is there a significant difference in meaning, in definition? If not, they're saying the same thing. They are synonymous. So if you've got a synonym, if it's saying exactly the same thing, if it's got verbatim identicality, why would you say that's a significant difference? It's just not. And so again, here we have TurretinFan just saying nothing, absolutely nothing.
With the Greek. And one of those similarities you'll notice is that although the TR has domine, that beatus, and you can see this is the same.
So notice, instead of going to the definitions that I've, worked out, that we're talking about either allusions to Revelation 16:5, to I am in Jehovah, or to both. And I clearly mentioned in the book that I'm not really going to the issue of Lord, but and I can understand TurretinFan wants to go there. That's fine, but it can just be another thing. Oh, see, this one doesn't have Lord either, and it's like, well, we're not really arguing that point, But it just, is this going to be another, number 10 of his 15 list that he's like, I've just got to get him. If I can get him wrong on 15 things, then I win, sort of thing. And it's like, no matter how trivial, or no matter whether, Nick hasn't even raised this thing, we'll just point out, yeah, anyway.
The same document that was provided by, it was originally provided by KJV Today, and then provided by Nick in his book from there. This is just a little bit more colorful. His is a little bit more, improved the contrast and so forth to make it a little bit more readable. But it's the exact same book, page number and everything. And it says the third angel, well, anyway, the point is not to read the whole thing, but to see this part, justus es, qui fuisti, et futurus es sanctus. And then you can see the same thing down here below, justus es, qui fuisti, et futurus es sanctus. So that's the history or story, and then this is the explanation of the history or story. So that's why there's two copies, because the text is repeated in the commentary section and also in the scripture section. And you'll notice that the domine is not found in here. It's also not found in here. And sanctus is found here, and it's found here as well. So the difference is important, but there is an interesting aspect of what beatus has here, and we shouldn't just breeze past it. What we need to notice is that beatus has not qui es et qui eras, but qui fuisti et futurus es. So this is a past. Fuisti is a past, and
so we're going to go and say it doesn't have the full triadic declaration there. When clearly in the book, I'm like, okay, we're looking at this, and I say this is equivalent to esomenos. So do I say this is equivalent to ho'on and esomenos? No, this is equivalent to esomenos. And so instead of TurretinFan just reading that and saying, oh, he's talking about the esomenos, the end part, which means shall be or will be, he's like, apparently Nick thinks there's a Greek word in the Latin text, and he's brought up this strange thing. So in doing so, he's actually not really read what I've said there. I'm talking about the future form, which is what I underline. And so he's going off onto all these other tangents. So it's got en futuris est. Okay. So then I'm pointing out that this is relative to the reading of esomenos. And if you go back up here, I clearly underline et futuris est and will be. So, and I clearly say which has been and will be. So notice I'm not underlining which has been at all. I'm talking about the future form. This is talking about the future form of it. And so, but, you know, what I find TurretinFan does is he goes, okay, so let's just point out all the, like Nick clearly spelt this out, said, and it says, which is the exact equivalent to kai esomenos. Did I say that this whole thing is exactly equivalent to ha'un kai esomenos? I didn't anywhere, did I? So why is he bringing this up? I never argued for that, but he's trying to debunk it as if I did argue for that. He's bringing up domine as if I've said that that's in the text as well. And it's like, I never said that. So again, we're just seeing that he's just going to go through and try and, you know, tick some boxes and go, well, you know, see, he's wrong here, wrong there, wrong there. And it's like, no, if you read through just clearly what I've said here, I've made the claim that this says et futuris est, which means kai esomenos, which is the future form, which equals and will be or and shall be. That's what I'm saying. So if you want to go off and debunk a whole bunch of other stuff, go for it. I'm sure, you know, go to Revelation 16:4 as well and find some other 16:3, 16:2, 16:1, and go and look at some text critical notes in there as well. I'm talking about this and shall be. And I'm spelling it out here, underlining exactly the spot and saying it several times throughout the whole thing, but you sort of just not getting it. And then I'm like, look, the Latin word, this, or shall be in quotations, appears twice in this picture. Did I say who was and is it? Yeah, and this is the same argument that Stephen Boyce was bringing up. Oh, it doesn't have the full triadic declaration there. It's like, well, I never said it did. He's like, yes, you did. Well, I never did, but I'm sorry if I did ever say that. That I was talking about the Ethiopic. And so after the debate, I went and checked everything I'd ever said. I'd never once made that claim. So I went back to him and said, hey, actually, Stephen, you know, I never made that claim. He's like, no, you admitted it in the debate. You apologized for it. It's like, no, I apologize if I'd ever done that. But I never did. I went back and looked. No, you're off the wall. And he just started, you're a stalker. You know, TR people actually don't like you. Blah, blah, blah. He just kept going on and on. I was just like, okay, we got another James White disciple here. But clearly I'm talking about the future form. So, you know, TurretinFan's just got to break it all on down and go through all this other stuff. Will he just admit, yes, it's got the future form, which is equivalent to what Theodore Beza has there? Or does he have to go, oh, the future form, but he doesn't have this other thing and this other thing and this other thing and this other? It's like, who's mentioning all that? You're the one mentioning. That's why I was saying this is straw man argumentation, because I'm making my argument here. But TurretinFan, I don't mind TurretinFan going through this material like he's doing, but he's just never acknowledging that it clearly says shall be here. So like he's like, I'm putting my feet into the shoes of someone who's uninformed and just watching him. They would be going, yeah, it doesn't have the triadic declaration, like just what Stephen Boyce did in the debate. Just bring up all this other stuff that's just trivial and I've never said. It's like, it doesn't have Lord there. It's like, okay, you want to talk about Lord? Maybe I'll write another book one day about Lord. It doesn't have exactly the same order. Okay, I never said it had to, but it doesn't have the exact same Latin word. It's like, well, there's synonyms, but it's like, didn't know I had to. It's like, I'm not making that claim that you have to do that. And it's just all these side issues. Will he ever just go read through that and go, yeah, I see that Nick's made a very good point. The et futurus est means shall be, which is the future form of the esomenos. It's equivalent to what Theodore Beza has, esomenos, that reading there. And like say, if I was to talk about monogenes huios or monogenes theos, I'd talk about those two words. I mean, yes, you might bring up some of the surrounding variants and everything, but it's like, why is this just constantly brought up all the way through? It's like, as if this is just a gotcha moment. It's like, man, I clearly in my book say, yes, in the majority text, the reading is mostly holy, but keeps getting brought up. So it's holy. Look at the manuscript evidence. Look at this list of stuff. And it's like, I guess in a way I'm just doubting. The more I go through this, I'm doubting the genuineness of TurretinFan, because like in the last 5 things that we looked at, they're just nothings. They're just not even worth mentioning. But anyway, he's showing how et futurus est is not et qui eris, and saying that there is a significant difference there. Significant. So when I point out the similarities between some of the manuscripts and Beza, I'm just like, oh, it just so happens to match up with Beza. Yay. I'm not like, yeah, that's a game changer. That's it. Case closed, sort of thing. It's like, well, it is. Like I'm sure Theodore Beza would have been going through all this Latin material and working out exactly how he was going to do his translation, because it's a Latin translation. So he was translating the Latin. And so he would have been looking at all the readings. He was always looking at the Vulgate, but he was looking at ways to translate it that he felt was equivalent to the Greek. And so anyway, I'll move on a little bit, and I might actually shut it down in a minute because it's pretty close to midnight. And as you can probably tell, I'm really tired. So
futurus est is a future. So he doesn't have a present, qui est. Instead, he has past and future, and he uses a different past than you would normally be expected. But the point is, instead of having, this part is the same, justus est, that's the same in all 3, actually. He omits the domine, which, as I said, is not found in the majority of the Greek manuscripts. And then he has qui fuisti et futurus est instead of qui est et qui eras. In other words, which has been and which will be. Now the question is this, what kind of witness is this? Is this witness to a reading in Greek of esomenos, or is this a different translation of the same Greek as is found in the Nessalon 28?
Okay, so now he's saying it doesn't, when it says et futurus est, it's mistranslated. So, Beatus of Libana, he did a whole bunch of commentary work and Latin work and everything, or perhaps where he got his reading from. They meant to write which is, but they, sorry, it wouldn't be which is, that would be which was, I guess, because you already have which is, and then you have and shall be. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. I might just double check that. Yeah, so you have which has, so the past and the future. So you have no is, okay. And so Beatus of Libana was translating the past and the present. This is the present, but he sort of accidentally made it into the future. Either Beatus did that or the people he's copying from. I mean, TurretinFan sort of pulls me over the coals for having, ideas that are just based on nothing. I'd like to see where this is based on. Or why won't he just simply admit that it is the future reading? I mean, it's like he's just pulled out everything. He's attacking. He's throwing shoes at this. He's pulling his shoes off his feet and he's throwing dust at this. And it's like, why can't you just turn around and say, yeah, it's a future reading? Because you have a bias against this reading, and you don't want this to be true, which is cognitive dissonance. It is true. It's the future reading. Text critics admit that this is the future reading. James White doesn't admit anything because, he's very toxic, and, he's got issues. But there are many people who, Hoskier, he admits this is the future reading. He separated it from everything else and said this is a future reading. He says the Ethiopic is a future reading as well. So I'm just not sure why you can't admit that this is a future reading. And now you have to say, it's mistranslated somewhere along the way. They actually meant to say something else and just, I don't know, slipped on a banana peel, I guess, or just banged their head. They're walking out of the house, banged their head, went back in, quickly wrote, the future. Or maybe they were smoking marijuana and wrote this. Who knows? Maybe aliens came down and showed them to write the future there. That's just as plausible. There's no reason to think that it's more reasonable to think that this is the future reading, the shall be reading, that the manuscript that Theodore Beza had pointed to, that the Ethiopic also points to, that the name of Jehovah points to, that it makes more sense. I can explain the rise of all these variants. If you were to say to me, why is it like that? And where is the present tense? I would say, well, perhaps they put holy maybe in a margin as a gloss, and it become part of the main text. And perhaps they had this sort of bracketed or in a certain section, and they weren't sure where to put the holy there. And so, or perhaps they had the whole entire reading, and the holy came afterwards, which we see in some places. You'll see the whole, all three there, and holy as well. And so here you have two and holy. But clearly my explanation explains the rise of these issues, where TurretinFan's doesn't. He has to go, well, the Shelby reading, they were actually trying to say is, but they said the future. It's like, well, why think that? Just because you just don't want this to exist? This exists, and this exists in 35 manuscripts, and the commentary has it as well, which goes back to Tychonius, according to the scholars, at 380. So it goes back to early work. So I'm just not sure why you would not agree and just say, yes, this shall be. It's so much easier to agree.
As is found in the majority of text, as is found in the first part of Beza, is this the same? Is he translating qui fuisti et futurus est? Is that a translation of the same Greek as this? And that's hard to say. However, there is this reading, which has been and will be holy. Sanctus is here, which has been and will be holy, which is different from, on a strictly literal sense, it is different from the which are and was. Now, for Nick's purposes, unfortunately, Nick is too focused on trying to find qui eris, which he doesn't have here, but it's roughly the same meaning, futurus es.
It's roughly the same meaning. You know what I mean? Like before he was saying this is a problem. Now it's roughly the same meaning. And why is it roughly the same meaning? I'd like TurretinFan to explain this. Why he thinks it's only roughly the same meaning. Yeah, it's you can sort of get there. No, they are synonyms. It's exactly the same meaning.
And as a result of being excited about looking for this, he's failed to identify whether this futurus es is the same reading as the corresponding Beza version of the text.
Okay, so everyone says that this et futurus est means and shall be. Everyone looking at this et qui eris says it means and shall be. But I've failed apparently. So let's listen to that again. Listen to this.
And as a result of being excited about looking for this, he's failed to identify whether this futurus es is the same reading as the corresponding Beza version of the text.
So even though pretty much everyone who's involved with this says it means and shall be, I've failed because TurretinFan has ticked another box and said, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Hey, everyone following me on my channel, blah, blah, blah. Nick says he got it wrong again, and over here, and let's look at something else. And over here, he's wrong here, there, got this wrong over here. And it's just like, you slow it down, you go through everything, and he's just saying absolute waffle. There's just nothing of substance here.
So he makes a comment like, he says, it's the exact equivalent to kai o hesomenos, which is what Beza has in Revelation 16:5. Now notice what Beza actually has in Revelation 16:5 is et qui eris, not et futurus es, which isn't a huge difference. It is a difference. This is which has been and will be, not which was and which will be, with the which repeated. But you might chalk that distinction up to a translational decision. Likewise, it's different from the original in that it does omit the which as well. And it's changing the tense from present past to past and future. Why? Did he have an exemplar in Greek that had?
So notice he's gone from saying that these two, there's like a remarkable difference between them. Then he's gone roughly saying the same thing. Then he's gone, well, this one and this one, we're not seeing the whole triadic declaration there. It's like he's conflating arguments. He needs to show why there's a difference here. And I'm just going to quickly go to he's saying the which is not there. Okay. It has which art and wast and shalt be. Okay. So whether it's got art and which wast and which shall be, or just which art and wast and shall be, there are certain grammatical constructs in English that do limit us at times to use certain words over and over. And so sometimes we might just use the conjunction and then we might use, if you understand the Oxford comma, you might use that in, say, a set of three things. He's just making an argument here that just means nothing. Again, it's just a nothing. It's almost hard to explain how trivial this is.
Past and future. Well, there's many things that are possible, but if he did have such an exemplar, that's a witness to a reading which has the past and the future and sanctus, holy.
Yeah, which would mean that it's a type of nomina sacra, which not only affects the Asomos reading, but also affects the reading of the present tense, which would further strengthen my case that they were putting a sanctus there because it is the name of God. Because they didn't want to say the full extended name. Because this is the past and the future without the present, but it's still got sanctus there, and so this further proves a nomina sacra, where your case is like, oh well, they just mistranslated this, because you don't want to admit that this is the future, which is pretty much like the only case that I'm making here at all. Is that's the future, and that's what you won't admit.
So it is not a witness to an expansion of a rare nomen sacrum form. In other words,
it is, because why isn't it? Why does it have the future form there? It's still got the first part. It's got the third part, and holy, where most of the other ones have the second part, the first part, and then the third part is just not there. Here we have the third part and the first part. Where's the second part? The second part is gone. Why? Because there were different ways of people putting working with the name of Jehovah here.
This omit is not present for sanctus. Sanctus is present. And it's not as though it has the...
It's because that's pointing to the nomina sacra. Sanctus means holy. It's a holy name. This is a name. This means holy. It's a holy name, so they wrote sanctus next to it.
A triadic declaration at all. It does.
So they either wrote sanctus next to it, they either wrote it on top of it, they either wrote it in a margin. I'm not sure. I'm only speculating on those things. But to me, it's very clear that is the expanded name of Jehovah. And so you have to deal with that it has the future form here. And how did that arise? Oh, it's just they were just mistranslating.
Doesn't. It has a biadic declaration. So it may be, and it's hard to know because it's not in the original language, but this may just be a witness to the Nestle 28 text, even though the text...
So now it's just a witness to the text that he wants it to be a witness to, just because. So he's just simply being stubborn, digging his heels in, and just not admitting what's right in front of him. Like, it's... Let me just... The last thing I want to do here, let's just go to Revelation 16:5. Okay. On my website, now I'm pretty sure I've got Hoskia. Yeah, here. Justus est domine et rectus qui feristi et eris. So that's Ethiopic. And that's a translation, Latin translation of the Ethiopic, that was done in the Walton's polyglot. So the Ethiopic was in 1549, so before Beza it was done. And then when you translate into Latin, it has the future form there. And you look at Beatus of Libana, it has qui fuisti et futurus es. So it has the future form there. So it's showing you where there are differences, and it's giving you the Greek, and then it's saying what language that is appearing in. Sometimes it's in the Latin for like the Ethiopic, Beatus of Libana. And so I guess, TurretinFan's bringing up this new thing that it's just the Nestle Alarm reading. I guess you could sort of say the moon's made out of cheese as well. You could just say it. The Bible says, "For God so loved the world that Satan danced on the head of a pin." You could say that as well, but you got to have proof of it. But there's just zero proof of this. That this is a Nestle Alarm reading, but it's just mistranslated. Instead of just acknowledging it's the future reading. It's easier just to go with the facts. So this is the problem. When I'm presented with facts, I adjust my thinking accordingly. When TurretinFan is presented with these pesky facts, he's stubbornly just sort of hitting the table and saying, no, it's not only is it not the future form, but it is actually my reading just mistranslated. It's like, this is the worst argument I've ever heard for this. Worst. Way worse than James White's argument. This is silly. And anyway, and the Arabic just says eterne, just has the one all-encompassing thing, because it's a name. It's a noun phrase. It's like, the thing is, it's like, have you forgotten everything I've written in the first 120 pages, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, we're just going to say it's the Nestle Alarm 28th edition. It's exactly equivalent to that, but they just got it wrong. It's like, seriously? Anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there. So I'm going to point out where I'm at. So we'll just have to drop that comment there. So we are at the 38-minute mark, 38:42 to be precise. So we'll finish it there. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you. And I think you can see, this is a very strong witness to the future form of esomenos that was adopted by Theodore Beza. It's also a very strong witness to prove that not only was Sanctus a replacement for esomenos in, say, Greek and others, but it was also a replacement for what would be the hot N reading, and so the present tense reading as well here in at least 35 Latin manuscripts. There could have been hundreds, but I'm not allowed to say that. But you can speculate that this was mistranslated, and it actually is. It is the Nestle Alarm reading. I mean, how do you get that? This is the Nestle Alarm reading, apparently. No, it has the future form in it, which is exactly how Theodore Beza has Kai Ho esomenos. Okay, so thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you, and we'll see you another time.